Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Jack Rayner. I'm 34 years old, and what I'm about to describe happened in August 2023. I'm writing this down in the hope that someone, anyone, will understand what truly happened to me in the depths of the New Hampshire wilderness. Maybe it will help you see the signs before it's too late. I was never a soldier or anything like that. For most of my adult life, I'd been a typical guy, working in a corporate software job in Boston, punching keys in an office, and drowning in petty deadlines. I was a decent coder, but I'd burned out. The constant demands of my boss, the soulless metrics, and the city's relentless hum all drove me to the brink. Every day, I felt my life losing color. My therapist at the time suggested a real break, but I knew they meant 2 weeks on a beach in Florida. I wanted something else, true silence. An off-grid cabin in the woods, away from everything and everyone. I didn't have a family anymore. My mother passed when I was a teenager, and my dad disappeared into his own mind years later. I had a handful of friends from college, but we drifted in and out of touch. One of those friends, Beth Cardin, had always been special. Close, maybe too close, but we never called it a relationship. She cared enough to check on me once in a while, even after I stopped returning her calls. When I found a cheap hunting cabin listing in New Durham, New Hampshire, on the outskirts of a region called Devil's Den, it felt like the sign I'd been waiting for. The local rumors around Devil's Den were enough to keep most folks away. People talked about strange sightings, swirling lights at night, or disembodied voices. But I brushed it off as folklore. The only thing I cared about was the land, the quiet, and the chance to build a life with minimal human contact. I moved into that cabin in July. It was small, smelled of damp wood and mice, and had this rickety porch overlooking a narrow stream. I was alone for the first few weeks and felt something almost like peace. During the day, I fixed roof shingles, chopped firewood, learned to filter my own water from the stream. At night, I tried to read or stargaze. Sometimes the wind carried the faintest whisper through the trees. My mind explained it away. Branches scraping, or maybe small animals scuttling through the undergrowth. Occasionally, I'd jolt awake with the sensation of being watched, but I told myself it was just the stress of adjusting. Time moved strangely out there. My watch broke early on, and the signal on my phone was a joke. I found that entire days would vanish into routine tasks. One morning, I realized I couldn't remember if it was Monday or Friday, and it didn't matter. Yet a weird numbness crept over me. Not just about the date, but about everything. I chalked it up to solitude. That place was silent, and I was sure it was healing me. It was mid-August when Beth suddenly appeared. I remember hearing a car engine on the dirt road outside and thinking, who the hell is coming all the way out here? I walked out, hatchet in hand, and saw Beth stepping out of her beat-up sedan. She was older than when I'd last seen her. Small lines around her eyes, hair a bit thinner. But she still had the same thoughtful gaze, as if she was analyzing the entire world at once and storing it away. She stood there in a flannel shirt, jeans, and hiking boots, a backpack slung over her shoulder. I stared. Beth? Jack, she said, setting down her bag. I've been worried. You vanish for months, don't respond to texts or calls, and then you send me a postcard with, what was it? I'm alive, doing fine, don't worry. That's it? I blinked. Yeah, sorry, didn't think you'd actually come up. She gave a tired half smile. Well, surprise. Mind if I stay a few days? Just want to see how you're holding up? I should have been mad or annoyed, but I felt a flood of relief. Maybe I needed a reminder that I hadn't completely fallen off the edge of the earth. So I led her inside and showed her around. The cabin was rough, dusty, full of half-repaired spots on the walls. Beth set down her stuff without complaint. That night, we ate a dinner of canned soup and crackers. She asked questions about my life in the cabin, how I got food, whether I was lonely. I shrugged a lot. I was never good at explaining my emotions. She told me about her divorce, how it finalized a few months ago, how she was on a new personal journey, traveling and living life on her own terms. There was warmth in her voice, but also this undercurrent of sadness. Before bed, I offered Beth the one decent sleeping bag I had. I'd been using a ratty old one, but I didn't mind. She insisted on putting her own sleeping pad on the floor, but I eventually got her to take the marginally less terrible bed. The cabin had exactly one small bedroom, separated by a flimsy door from the main living area. I stayed on the battered couch near the fireplace. We both drifted off eventually. The last thing I remember that night was hearing a distant rustling, almost like someone shuffling around outside. I reached for the flashlight, but the batteries were dead. Typical. After another minute, the sound vanished, and I gave in to sleep. The next morning, Beth and I woke to find that her phone was completely dead. It had been charging from a solar power bank, but apparently the bank was drained too. She gave me a hard time, half joking that I was zapping her electronics with my negative energy. I said I'd show her the place around the stream and get fresh water. She seemed eager, so off we went. The day was sunny and bright. We followed a narrow footpath that led down to the stream, about half a mile from the cabin. Beth was impressed by the scenery. Towering pines, a scattering of birches, patches of moss that felt like plush carpets underfoot. I'd almost forgotten how beautiful it could be during the day. But as we walked, Beth noticed something. The trail markers, simple paint blazes on some of the trees, weren't consistent with the map I'd shown her. The map I'd downloaded weeks ago indicated a straightforward loop, but we found ourselves at junctions that didn't exist on paper. And at one point, the GPS on Beth's phone momentarily flickered back to life, only to show us floating in the Atlantic Ocean. We both laughed it off as a glitch. Yet, deep down, I felt a strange unease. We spent the afternoon gathering firewood. The forecast suggested cooler nights ahead, and I didn't want to rely on the ancient propane tank that might or might not still be safe. We stacked a nice pile behind the cabin. By evening, we'd worked up a hearty appetite. Beth rummaged through the cooler, only to find that some of the supplies I'd bought were already spoiled. Milk curdled, vegetables going mushy in record time. Even the sealed jerky had a foul odor. I scratched my head, blaming it on poor refrigeration. Beth, though, had this pensive look, like she was adding up a list of oddities. We decided to make a campfire outside rather than use the fireplace inside the stuffy cabin. The night air was crisp, and the sky was unbelievably clear. I'd collected some kindling, but each time I struck a match to light the fire, it caught for a moment, then died, as if smothered by an unseen hand. We tried again, over and over. The flame would burn bright green for a second, green, I swear to God, then sputter out. Eventually, I drenched the wood in a bit of spare lamp oil, and we finally got it roaring. I couldn't stop staring at that first flash of green in the flames, though. Beth noticed it too. She asked if the wood might be contaminated with chemicals. I had no idea. We ate a quick meal of canned beans and toast. Neither of us spoke much. The forest around us hummed with the usual nightlife, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. But I kept feeling as though something else was out there, just beyond the ring of firelight, watching. That second night, I dreamed of a whispering voice repeating my name. Jack, Jack. I woke in a cold sweat. The cabin felt suffocating. I rolled over on the couch, trying to calm my breathing. Across the room, I saw Beth's sleeping bag. It was unzipped. She was still inside it, but somehow it had been opened from the inside, even though I could see Beth's arms pinned to her sides. It made no sense. I grabbed my flashlight, new batteries, courtesy of Beth's pack, and leaned in. Beth looked peaceful, eyes closed. Her hair was spread out on the pillow, but the sleeping bag zipper was fully undone all the way down, like a husk peeled open. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Beth unzipped it in her sleep and rolled over, but something about it felt off, as if it had been done with a deliberate slowness. In the morning, Beth was the first to notice the blood. We had a stack of firewood out front and it was dripping red. My first thought was maybe an animal got hurt, but the blood was fresh, bright, staining the edges of the logs. When I carefully lifted one piece, there was a sticky blot of gore. No bits of fur, no footprints in the dirt. Just blood. I stared at Beth, searching for an explanation, but her face said she was just as baffled. "This is insane," she murmured. "Could be a deer wandering by. Maybe it got spooked and cut itself." I nodded, unconvinced, but said nothing. We decided to discard that entire batch of wood. Around noon that day I found him. Or maybe he found me. I was out by the stream, checking my small water filter contraption. Beth was inside, tidying up. As I crouched there in my boots, I heard humming. A strange, low tune that reminded me of a church hymn, but with some notes out of place, drifting in from behind me. I stood up fast, nearly dropping the filter. He stood at the tree line, bare feet sunk into the moss, hands casually behind his back. He wore khaki pants and a plain white shirt, both too clean for someone out here. He looked around my age, but his face had this ageless quality, as if he could have been anywhere from 20 to 50. His hair was dark and neatly parted. He smiled at me, and his eyes were so dark I couldn't see a reflection in them. "Nice place you got here," he said. His voice was pleasant, almost musical. I swallowed. "Are you lost?" The man shook his head slowly. "I've been through these woods many times, friend." "No, I'm not lost." Then he extended a hand. "Call me Lucian." I hesitated. Something about him set me on edge. Still, I found myself stepping forward, offering a guarded handshake. His grip was gentle but weirdly firm, like velvet stretched over steel. His skin was cool to the touch. "You're new to these parts," he went on, as if we were old friends catching up. "I like to keep track of the folks around. These woods, they don't always treat strangers kindly." I looked him over. "You live nearby?" "Here and there," he said, shrugging. "I wander." We stood in awkward silence. My eyes flicked to his bare feet. The ground was littered with rocks and pine needles, yet he showed no sign of discomfort. For a second, I glanced at the stream, trying to figure out an excuse to get away from him, but he spoke again before I could. "How's your friend?" he asked. "She seems worried about you." "How do you know about Beth?" I snapped. A chill trickled down my spine. He smiled. "Small cabin, thin walls. Lovely voice she has, though. I heard her humming last night." He turned to look over his shoulder into the deeper woods. "Anyway, I won't keep you, but I do hope you'll invite me in for dinner. Maybe later?" I wanted to say no, but the words wouldn't form in my mouth. Finally, I managed something like, "We'll see." Lucian raised a hand in a casual wave, then walked off, disappearing among the trees within seconds. When I got back to the cabin, Beth took one look at my face and demanded an explanation. I told her about Lucian. She was concerned, but also curious. "It's not that strange for someone to be passing through," she reasoned. "But Barefoot? I shrugged, uneasy. He asked about you by name, Beth. I never told him your name. That drained the color from her cheeks. What does he want? Dinner, apparently, I said. I don't know. That evening, Beth and I stayed indoors. Something about Lucian's sudden appearance and all the other bizarre events made me want to barricade the doors. We lit a small fire in the ancient fireplace, ignoring the odd green flickers that flared up from time to time. The air was thick with tension. Beth was rummaging through her backpack for her phone when she gasped. I spun around to see her holding the device, the screen shattered. "It was fine this morning," she whispered. "I didn't drop it, I swear." We tested it. Dead. No sign of life. Our only other phone was mine, which had almost no battery left, and it too had no signal. I tried to flick on the data connection, but it stubbornly refused to connect to any tower. For a moment, I realized how alone we really were. The nearest neighbors, as far as I knew, were miles away. Beth and I decided to keep ourselves busy. We started making dinner, just rice and beans. As the pot simmered, the lights flickered. The small generator outside whirred and coughed. Then the lights went out entirely, leaving us with only the orange glow of the fireplace and 2 lanterns. I cursed, figuring I'd have to check the generator's fuel line. But a quiet fear gnawed at me, that maybe someone, had tampered with it. We ate in near silence, listening to the crackle of the fireplace. At one point, I glanced up from my bowl and saw Beth's eyes shining with tears, reflecting the firelight. She looked exhausted. I knew I wasn't exactly a comforting presence. In truth, I was rattled to the core. After dinner, we double-checked the windows and doors. I tried to secure them as best I could, though it's not like that old cabin was Fort Knox or anything close. Finally, we settled into our sleeping spots, Beth in the bedroom, me on the couch. The fire was dwindling, but I kept the hatchet within arm's reach. The darkness felt alive, pressing in from every corner. At some point past midnight, I awoke to a voice, murmuring, speaking quietly. Not Beth's, not mine. My heart hammered in my chest. The voice was calm, almost affectionate, whispering things I couldn't quite make out. I sat up, leaning forward, straining my ears. I followed the sound to the bedroom door. It was slightly ajar. Inside, the embers of a lantern cast a faint glow on the walls. Through the crack, I glimpsed Lucian. He was crouched by Beth, leaning over her. His lips moved, his eyes fixed on her sleeping face. Fear clamped my throat. I flung the door open, brandishing the hatchet. "What the hell?" I yelled. Lucian turned to me, still smiling, and placed a finger to his lips in a shh gesture. "She's having such a beautiful dream," he whispered. Then, in a blink, he was gone. One moment he was there. The next, the corner of the room was empty. I lunged forward, searching for any possible hiding place. Nothing. The bedroom window was locked from the inside. Beth stirred awake with a start. She saw my panic, saw the hatchet in my hand, and screamed. It took me a few minutes to calm her down enough to explain. She looked around, wide-eyed, but there was no sign of Lucian or forced entry. "It's like he just vanished," she said, voice trembling. I nodded, unable to speak. My mind raced with possible explanations. Maybe the latch was broken, or a floorboard was loose, or I was losing it. But everything pointed to something else, something impossible. The next day, Beth woke up alone. She told me she'd had the most terrifying dream. A man's voice whispering how she was forgiven and worthy. She swore she felt a cold hand on her head. I had no reason to doubt her. She also noticed something else. Her phone was now perfectly intact, no shattered screen, but it was still dead, battery at 0%. She looked at me, voice quivering. "Jack, Am I losing my mind? I wished I could say yes, that it was just our imaginations, but the evidence was too bizarre. We decided to try and hike out to the main road, see if we could drive to the nearest town for supplies or help. With Beth's car, we could get out of this place. But as we packed our things and stepped outside, we found the dirt road leading away from the cabin muddy and unnavigable, flooded as though from a heavy rainfall. But the sky was clear. I had no memory of a storm. Maybe we can still get the car through, I muttered. We hiked down the road, but within minutes, the muddy ruts were deep enough to swallow half a tire. Even if we tried, the sedan wouldn't get far. We agreed to attempt the hike on foot to find someone with a truck or get to higher ground for a cell signal. We walked for an hour. The road meandered through dense trees, occasionally opening up to patches of swampy ground. With each bend, I expected to see a clearing, or at least the main route, but the road looped back on itself in a maddening circle. By noon, we realized we weren't making any real progress. The GPS on my phone teased us with random location pins, then dropped out again. When we turned back, it took us surprisingly little time to get back to the cabin, almost as if the distance had shortened. Beth stared at me. "This is insane," she whispered. "We walked for hours." She showed me her watch. Only 20 minutes had passed since we first left. My chest tightened. Something was wrong with time itself out here. That afternoon, the food spoiled again. Even the sealed cans looked rusted, and the bread had grown green mold from end to end. Only the dry rice remained somewhat edible. We had water from the stream, but the stream's flow seemed slower, almost stagnant. A sense of doom clung to every moment. By evening, we slumped in the cabin, exhausted from fruitless attempts to leave. Beth looked through the small, grimy window and cursed under her breath. "What?" I asked. "There's someone out there." She pointed. "Look." I peered into the fading light. Sure enough, a figure stood near the tree line. Lucian. His face was partially hidden by shadow, but I knew it was him. I could feel it. Suddenly, he waved at us, as if beckoning us outside. Beth swallowed. "What do we do?" I remembered his words. "Invite me in for dinner." My stomach twisted at the thought. But maybe if we humored him, he'd let us go. Maybe we could glean some answers. Against my better judgment, I opened the door and called out, "Lucian, if you want to talk, come in." My voice shook more than I'd have liked. He appeared at the threshold within moments, stepping inside with that polite smile. There was nothing outwardly monstrous about him. No horns, no wings, but my instincts screamed that he was as far from human as anything could be. Beth and I sat near the dying fire, trying not to show our fear. We had no real meal to offer besides half-burned rice and some stale crackers, but Lucian shook his head, saying he wasn't hungry. He commented on the lovely arrangement we had, gesturing to the meager furniture, the half-repaired walls, as though it was a palace. I stood, arms crossed, heart pounding. "Why are we stuck here?" I demanded. "Why can't we leave?" Lucian met my gaze with unblinking intensity. "Who says you can't leave? You're free to go whenever you like. The forest is open." "Don't lie," Beth snapped, braver than me in that moment. "We tried everything." He sighed, almost kindly, as if explaining something simple to a child. "Ah, yes. The mind can be such a powerful force, can't it? Worries, doubts, they turn simple paths into mazes." He paused, eyes flicking between us. "Jack, you came out here to run away from the world, but part of you needed someone to blame for how you feel. Beth, you've been searching for closure, for an escape from your past. Perhaps these woods are giving you exactly what you asked for." I clenched my fists. "What the hell are you?" "Does it matter?" He leaned forward. "I like you both. You're interesting. But if you're truly set on leaving, you must believe you can." Shed your guilt, your regrets. Then the path will open." He stood, stepping toward Beth. She flinched as he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're forgiven," he said softly. "Let it go." She yanked away, trembling. I lunged, brandishing the hatchet I'd kept tucked by my side. In an instant, the lights flickered and Lucien was gone again, vanished into thin air. No door or window opened. Beth and I were left panting, hearts racing. The cabin felt claustrophobic, as if the walls were closing in. Night came, and we barricaded ourselves inside. Beth set up her sleeping bag in the bedroom again, but neither of us expected to get any rest. We doused the lantern, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight through the window. Hours crawled by. I must have dozed because I jerked awake to the sound of an anguished scream. "Beth!" I ran to the bedroom, hatchet in hand. The bed was empty, the sleeping bag torn open. My mind screamed, "He took her!" I rushed out into the main room, ready to fight anyone or anything I found. Nothing. The front door was wide open, a cold breeze swirling in. I stepped onto the porch, frantic. The darkness outside seemed thicker than normal, as though it had weight. I called out Beth's name. No answer. A flicker of movement drew my eye to the tree line. With the moon overhead, I saw a figure stumbling among the trunks. I sprinted after it, ignoring the brambles and roots catching at my ankles. My lungs burned with terror. I reached the figure and found it to be Beth, or someone who looked like Beth, standing there in her pajamas. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, her expression blank. "Beth!" I hissed, grabbing her shoulders. "What happened? Are you hurt?" She blinked slowly, turning her head to face me. Something was horribly wrong with her eyes, like she was seeing but not recognizing. She didn't speak, her lips parted in a slack grin, smiling too long. A tear ran down her cheek, but she said nothing. "Beth?" I repeated, shaking her lightly. She just kept smiling that vacant smile. Then, in a voice that wasn't hers, she said, "Jack, let it go, Jack." The tone was deeper, resonating with an echo. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle, and she blinked once, maybe the slowest blink I've ever seen. Fear hammered in my chest. Was it Lucien, controlling her, possessing her? My eyes searched her body for any injury. I saw no blood, but her arms were limp, and her legs looked shaky. "Beth," I tried again, more gently. "We need to get back to the cabin." She let me guide her, almost like a doll. When we reached the porch, I saw my footprints in the dirt, but none for her, as if she glided across the ground without disturbing it. I brought her inside, closed the door, and propped a chair against it. She followed obediently, that same eerie smile on her lips. Once I seated her in the bedroom chair, she just stared at the wall, blinking too infrequently. Once a minute, maybe. My entire body trembled with adrenaline. "Come on, Beth, talk to me." She eventually turned her head. "You're not free," she rasped, her throat sounding raw. "You never will be if you keep fighting. Stop fighting. Let us in." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, but she offered only silence. I got a canteen of water, lifted it to her lips. She sipped, face contorting with some emotion I couldn't define. Then she spat the water out, half laughing, half choking. It was horrifying, like her body didn't know how to behave. She stood, took one shaky step, then collapsed on the bed, out cold. I listened to her heartbeat. It was racing, but steady. I spent the rest of that night pacing, gripping the hatchet so hard my knuckles ached. Daylight brought no relief. Beth didn't wake until mid-morning. When she did, she seemed more herself, but with a distant edge, like some essential part of her was missing. She mumbled about a dream, that she'd walked into the woods, saw a figure that looked like her father, or maybe her ex-husband, calling her. Then she remembered nothing else. I told her what happened. Her face went ashen. We decided we had to leave immediately, no matter the odds. The car was useless, the road was flooded or looped, but we'd try the forest itself. Head due south. If we didn't find an exit, at least we'd keep moving. The cabin was cursed or haunted. Something unnatural was anchored here. We packed our remaining supplies, some stale granola bars, water, extra clothes. I also grabbed my father's old compass, which had belonged to him before his mind slipped away. He used it on fishing trips. I'd kept it mostly as a keepsake. If GPS was failing, maybe the compass would give us a heading. We set off. The day was cool, overcast. Perfect for a long hike under normal circumstances. We navigated by the compass, ignoring any pre-existing trails. Our plan? Keep going south until we hit a road or a house or anything. The forest around us grew denser as we walked. Hours passed. The compass needle wavered, sometimes spinning in slow circles. My anxiety spiked every time it did that, but then it would stabilize and point south again. At some point, Beth let out a cry of alarm. She pointed ahead. A shape lay on the ground. Approaching, we realized it was a deer, or what was left of one. The carcass looked half decayed, though the odor was fresh. Parts of its flesh were torn away, revealing glistening ribs, but the eyes were untouched, wide open in a panic. Something about the decay was unnatural, like time had sped up for certain parts of its body. Maggots wriggled in raw muscle that looked like it had rotted for weeks, yet there was no foul smell. I tried not to gag. Beth turned away, tears in her eyes. We pressed on, stepping around the carcass, but we'd only gone a few hundred feet when the forest around us began to shift. The trees parted in ways they hadn't before, new clearings appearing. The compass needle spun wildly, refusing to give any orientation. Suddenly, up ahead, I saw the cabin. Our cabin. It looked exactly the same, right down to the half-broken chair on the porch. "No," Beth gasped, voice trembling. "We walked in a straight line." I roared in frustration, hurling the compass to the ground. It cracked. We had no rational explanation for how we ended up back there. Time and distance had no meaning in these woods. With no other options, we slumped back into the cabin. Beth was shaking with exhaustion and fear. I felt rage roiling in my gut. This place was taunting us. Or maybe Lucian was, controlling the environment. I had the wild thought that if we destroyed the cabin, maybe the hold it had on us would break. That evening, we mustered enough energy to gather some branches for a final fire. I planned to burn the place down if it came to it. Beth was in the cabin, packing. As I bent to pick up more branches, I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned. Beth stood there. But she didn't look right. Her posture was rigid, her eyes far too wide. "We need more wood," she said, a monotone that made my skin crawl. I frowned. "Beth, didn't you say you were staying inside?" She repeated, "We need more wood." Then she reached out, touched my shoulder, and gave this horrible grin, with no warmth behind it. My blood ran cold. Something about her hand on me felt unnatural, heavy. I forced a tight smile and said, "Yeah, sure. Let's head back in soon." She nodded once, but didn't move. After a moment of tense staring, she slowly turned and walked away, deeper into the woods. I let her go for a few steps, then realized she was vanishing into the darkness. "Wait," I called. "Beth, come back. You'll get lost." She didn't respond. I dropped the branches and sprinted after her, but I couldn't see her anywhere. It was as if she'd dissolved among the trees. Panic clawed at me. This wasn't the real Beth. The real Beth must still be inside the cabin. Racing back, I burst through the door and found her rummaging through a crate, exactly where I'd left her. She looked up at my arrival, startled. "Jack, what's wrong?" she asked, seeing my ashen face. I just stared, heart pounding. Someone who looked like you, was just out there. Her eyes widened. Was it Lucian? I sank to my knees, hating how powerless I felt. I don't know anymore. Night settled in once again, and the dread felt heavier. The generator died completely. We lit some candles, deciding to conserve what little lamp oil remained. Beth sat at the small wooden table, head in her hands, while I paced, the hatchet never far from my grip. She started talking, voice thin, about regrets, her failed marriage, how she never told me how she really felt back in college. I felt a sting in my chest. I wanted to confess my own guilt, how part of me always wondered if we could have had something real, but I couldn't find the words. Something about this place seemed to consume confessions and twist them. A scratching sound at the window made us both jump. I turned to see Lucian's face pressed to the glass, smiling. He mouthed a single word, "Hello." Then he vanished. I flipped the lock on the door again, though it provided no real security. We sat in tense silence. Beth eventually dozed off with her head on the table, her arms folded as a makeshift pillow. I hovered near the fireplace, fueling it with leftover kindling. At some point, the wind outside grew strong, rattling the shutters. Suddenly, a series of thumps battered the walls. Boom! Boom! As if something massive was circling the cabin, hitting the wooden logs with heavy fists. Beth snapped awake, eyes wild. We both clutched each other for a moment, terror gripping us. Then, with a final crash, one of the windows shattered. The howling wind blasted in, scattering embers and candlelight. I scrambled to shield Beth, brandishing the hatchet. But there was no intruder, just shards of glass. The wind died as abruptly as it started. I stuck my head out, shining a flashlight around. No sign of a bear or any other creature. The silence weighed heavily. We retreated to the bedroom, shutting the door. Beth propped a chair under the doorknob. I hammered a few nails into the window frame with trembling hands. It felt like trying to barricade ourselves from a nightmare. Nevertheless, we tried. The hours ticked by in excruciating slowness. Sometime near dawn, exhaustion dragged me under. I woke to the smell of smoke and flames flickering across the ceiling. The cabin was on fire. My mind raced. I must have left the fireplace unattended. Or perhaps Lucian set it intentionally. The room glowed an angry orange. I grabbed Beth's shoulder, and we fled from the bedroom. Flames licked the rafters. We coughed, eyes burning from the smoke. When we tried the front door, it was jammed or locked from the outside. Panic roared in my ears. I hammered at it with the hatchet until the wood splintered, and we tumbled out onto the porch. We stumbled into the yard, coughing violently. The cabin was engulfed, flames crackling. Amid the swirling smoke, I saw a shape step out from the side of the cabin. Lucian, standing as though the fire meant nothing. He turned his head, offering me an even gaze. His clothes were untouched by the flames licking at the porch. Next to him stood a figure. Beth. But Beth was right beside me, struggling to breathe. Yet there she was. A second Beth, wreathed in smoke, wearing the same clothes but with an empty stare. My heart nearly stopped. The second Beth turned to Lucian, then faced me, a malignant grin twisting her face. I looked at the real Beth, who was shaking her head in disbelief. The double stepped forward, and in a blink, she and Lucian vanished into the flames, leaving behind a swirl of choking smoke. Beth and I had no time to process the impossibility of it. The fire was spreading to the nearby trees. We ran back, grabbing a couple of water jugs to douse the edges and prevent the entire forest from catching. We managed to keep it from turning into a full-blown wildfire, but the cabin was unsalvageable. We watched our safe haven, if it ever was safe, collapse into a blackened skeleton of logs. By the time the sun rose fully, the cabin was a smoking ruin. We realized we had almost no supplies now. My phone, my meager gear, everything left inside was destroyed. We had only the clothes on our backs, the hatchet, and a single half-burned sleeping bag that Beth managed to pull free at the last second. We stood there, adrenaline crashing, not sure what to do next. Then Beth's eyes locked on something behind me. She went pale. I turned and saw Jack, another version of me, emerging from the smoldering ashes of the cabin. He had my height, my hair, my face, but his eyes were inky black. My stomach lurched and Beth stumbled backward. This other me smirked, the left corner of his mouth curling in a way I never do. He raised a finger, pressing it to his lips in a hush motion, mimicking Lucian. In a split second, he lunged at us, arms outstretched. I swung the hatchet blindly, connecting with nothing. He was gone. Beth and I fell to our knees, gasping, tears of horror streaming down our faces. The illusions, the possession, whatever was happening, it was escalating. If Lucien was behind it, he was no mere trickster. He was something far worse. We had to leave, now. No hesitation, no second guessing. We had no cabin, no road, no compass. Still, I insisted we move on. Pick a direction, keep going, even if it took all day. Beth, still trembling, agreed. As we walked, Beth started crying softly. "Jack," she said, "I can't do this anymore. It's too much." I squeezed her hand. "I know." We trudged forward. My feet felt like lead, my mind raw. Late in the afternoon, we spotted a break in the tree line. With a surge of hope, we pushed through the brush and emerged onto what looked like a faint dirt trail. Not the main road, but certainly a path used by vehicles at some point. Elation soared in my chest. Maybe we'd find a farmhouse or a ranger station. The sun was low, but if we followed this, maybe we'd be out by nightfall. We turned left, following the road. Half an hour later, I noticed an odd shape in the distance. A truck, perhaps. As we drew closer, my heart soared. It was a large pickup parked haphazardly to the side. The windows were cracked. Dust caked on the doors. Hope flared. If we could get it started, we might drive out. Beth jogged ahead, ignoring her fatigue. When we reached it, we found the driver's door open. There was a foul smell inside, rotting food in a cooler on the passenger seat, and something else, the stench of death. I braced myself and peered into the back seat. A shape lay slumped there. A man in a flannel shirt, eyes sunken, mouth open in a silent scream. His flesh had decayed in bizarre patches. One side of his face was almost skeletonized, while the other side looked fresh. The sight was so horrifying I nearly retched. The seat beneath him was soaked in thick black fluid. Beth covered her mouth, tears welling. She backed away, stumbling on the dirt. This was some poor soul who'd likely gotten trapped in these woods, just like us. And the same sense of accelerated decay lingered. The truck's keys were still in the ignition. With trembling hands, I turned them. The engine didn't even cough. We rummaged around, found a few items of use, a half-empty bottle of water, rancid smell but maybe workable, some blankets in the truck bed. No gas can, no sign of a phone or radio. The man's ID said his name was Trevor Mills, from Maine. Another lost soul. We gently closed the door, stepping away from the scene of horror. We kept going, fighting the urge to scream or give up entirely. The road eventually led us to a small clearing. My breath caught. There, standing in the middle of the clearing, was Lucien again. His posture was relaxed, as if expecting us. Next to him stood me, that second me with black eyes, and on his other side stood the second Beth, the one I'd seen near the flames. I froze, gut twisting. The doubles were exact replicas of us, down to the clothes, but with subtle differences, dark veins around the eyes, twisted smiles. Lucien placed a hand on each of their shoulders, like a proud father. "I told you," Lucien said softly, "you could go whenever you like, but you still carry your burdens. They weigh you down." Beth let out a shaky breath. "We're not playing your game anymore. Let us out." Lucien cocked his head. "A game? Is that what you think this is?" He stepped forward. "I gave you a chance to release your guilt, your regrets, to break free of the illusions you've built around yourselves. Instead, you fight me." I lifted the hatchet, adrenaline spiking. "Stay back." He smiled, as if amused. "You don't understand." Then he glanced at my double. The double smiled even wider and lunged at me. I swung the hatchet. The blade connected with something solid. The double let out a chilling laugh, even as the blade sank into its side. Thick, inky fluid seeped out. I yanked the hatchet free. The double staggered, face twisted in a rictus grin, then collapsed to the ground in a writhing heap. Yet it kept smiling, eyes fixed on me. The black fluid oozed over the dirt. I clenched the hatchet, shaking. The double's eyes rolled back in its head, and it finally went still. Lucien never reacted, only turned to the Beth double. She shrank away from him and melted into the trees, gone in an instant. That left only Lucien, me, and the real Beth. I advanced on Lucien. "End this," I hissed. He studied me with an expression of faint sadness. "But Jack, the illusions we face are our own. I can't end them for you." I screamed in rage and swung the hatchet at him. He caught my wrist in a grip like iron. I felt my bones grind as he forced my arm aside. Fire shot up my nerves. Beth tried to tackle him from behind, but he spun, tossing her aside with ease. She hit the ground hard, gasping in pain. Lucien's face was inches from mine, his eyes black pits. "Would you like to see what happens if you stay, Jack?" he asked softly. "Would you like to know the truth?" Then he let go. My hand stung from the force of his grip. He stepped back, glancing at the writhing double on the ground. "I'll leave you to it. One final chance to free yourself." With that, he vanished, literally gone between one heartbeat and the next. Beth coughed, struggling to her feet. I rushed to her, feeling tears sting my eyes. "Are you okay?" She winced, holding her ribs. I think I'm bruised up, but nothing's broken." She glanced at the double that lay motionless, that uncanny copy of me with black eyes. The inky blood around it was congealing into a tar-like substance. She shuddered and looked away. We limped onward. Nothing else existed in our minds but the need to escape. The path extended deeper into the forest, though the trees were thinning. We prayed it was the route out. The sun sank low again, another day almost spent in this cursed place. My entire body ached, each step a burning ordeal. We finally stumbled onto a small clearing. At its edge, we saw a shape that brought fresh tears of relief. A paved road. It cut a black ribbon through the forest, with a battered guardrail on one side. In the distance, I heard the faint hum of a passing vehicle. My heart soared, but caution shadowed it. Was this another trick? We pressed on, half running, half limping. Reaching the guardrail, we climbed over it and stepped onto the paved shoulder. The asphalt felt unreal beneath my boots. I scanned for any sign of illusions. Beth took a tentative step down the road. It felt normal, solid. The forest pressed in from either side, but this was definitely a legit roadway. We walked maybe half a mile when we heard the distant rumble of an engine behind us. We spun around, waving desperately. A large semi-truck came around the bend, headlights illuminating us in the twilight. The driver braked, tires screeching. He rolled down the window, eyes wide at the sight of two filthy, shaking strangers on the roadside. "What the hell happened to you two?" he asked, voice full of concern. "You all right?" Beth and I exchanged glances. We had no words that would make sense. We got lost," I managed finally. "Our cabin burned down. We need help." The driver, a middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard, nodded. "Hop in. Closest town is about 10 miles that way." He pointed behind him. We climbed into the cab, the smell of stale coffee and cigarette smoke hitting us. He started to drive. Beth sank into the seat, tears of relief rolling down her cheeks. I stared out the window, struggling to believe we were truly free, but just as I began to relax, the radio crackled to life. Soft static at first, then faint voices. My mind locked onto the words. They were my words, from years ago, talking to an old coworker about quitting the city. "I just can't take it anymore," the voice on the radio said. "I feel like I'm losing time." It was my voice, recorded from a conversation that happened months before I ever left Boston. The driver fiddled with the dial, scowling. "Damn radio picks up all sorts of junk signals out here." I stared at the speaker, stomach twisting. Beth's eyes flickered to me. She recognized my voice too. Her grip on my arm tightened. I whispered, "Turn it off, please." He obliged, flipping the switch. Silence returned, except for the low hum of the engine. We sped along that deserted road, the headlights carving tunnels of light through the night. I tried to quell the sense of dread creeping back. We were out. We escaped, right? A few minutes later, the driver glanced at Beth in the rearview mirror. "Miss, you okay?" he asked. My name is Jack Morley, and I'm 32 years old. This all happened in mid-October of 2023, during a week that was supposed to be my escape from everything. My job, my divorce, my stifling apartment in downtown Boston. I'd planned a solo trek through the Great Gulf Wilderness in New Hampshire, figuring I could clear my head by spending a few days in nature with my dog, Remus. I wasn't prepared for what I would encounter. I doubt anyone could be. I used to think I knew about camping. Sure, I wasn't a hardened outdoorsman or anything, but I'd read the manuals, watched the YouTube survival channels, and taken Remus on a few state park hikes. That was enough, I told myself. I'd practiced rigging a tent in my living room. I'd tested my stove in the backyard. I thought I had it covered. At the time, I was in a weird headspace. My marriage had collapsed in August, and I decided an unplugged trip would be the best form of therapy. To be honest, I was running from people. I just wanted quiet. The Great Gulf area, nestled between the ridges of the Presidential Range, wasn't a typical tourist spot in late fall. The rangers recommended different trails for the season, ones with easier terrain. But I was stubborn. I wanted isolation and challenge. That's exactly what I got. My phone died on the first day. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was the cold, draining the battery faster, or I'd left an app running. No big deal, I thought. I had my GPS device, brand new, top of the line with a full charge. But that started glitching on me too, refusing to hold a signal. Sometimes it showed me half a mile from my actual location. Other times, it froze entirely. In the absence of technology, I turned to my map. I'd printed out a color-coded set of topographic maps for the region. By the second day, I realized the lines, the ridges, didn't match what I was seeing. The trails meandered in places that made no sense. It was so surreal, I began to suspect I'd printed the wrong version. Or maybe I was crossing from one territory to another. But it kept happening. Remus, my German shepherd, was the only reason I didn't lose my mind then and there. He seemed to sense my uncertainty. Whenever I stopped to consult the map for the 10th time, Remus would nuzzle my leg or whine, as if to say, "Come on, buddy, keep going, we'll figure it out." I decided to cut cross-country down toward a dried creek bed I'd seen on a satellite photo before leaving home. Maybe I'd make camp there for the night, then find my way back to a proper trail in the morning. That was how I found the ruins. They appeared on my second evening. Moss-covered stone foundations with a few crumbling walls barely high enough to reach my knee. I almost tripped over them while forging through the brush. It was late. Sunset had gone by quickly, leaving me with just the last scraps of twilight, and I didn't want to keep pressing on in the dark. I looked around, found a relatively flat patch of ground. It wasn't perfect, but I thought, why not? This place is kind of interesting. I pitched my tent right next to the largest stone structure, which looked like it could have been a house's foundation over a century ago. It had a basement-level pit in the center, half filled with dirt and dead leaves. There was a hush to the air that made me feel simultaneously calm and uneasy. It was the calm of a place left alone for a very long time. That first night at the ruins, I built a small fire. I remember thinking that the flames looked off. The color was strange. Sometimes the flames flickered the usual orange, but then they'd shift to this unnatural bluish hue. I told myself it was likely a mineral in the wood or a chemical from decaying logs. But Remus didn't like it. He paced around the ring of light, hackles raised, occasionally letting out a low growl at nothing I could see. I heard a faint sound that night, like a young woman humming. The noise drifted across the ruins just after midnight. It was so soft that I questioned whether I'd imagined it. Remus, though, definitely heard something, because he let out a series of short, sharp barks. I tried shining my flashlight into the trees, scanning for deer, or maybe some lost hiker. Nothing. Eventually, I crawled into my tent, pulled Remus in with me, and forced myself to sleep, ignoring the sense that something was off. The next morning, I woke up to a bizarre sight. My sleeping bag was unzipped, but from the inside, as if I'd undone it and climbed out of it. But I hadn't, as far as I remembered. I always sleep zipped in because the nights are cold up there, and I'd have known if I woke. Groggy, I checked the tent flap. Still shut and zipped. Remus was curled by my feet, quiet but tense, staring at me like he wanted me to fix something. My watch showed 7:14 a.m., but as soon as I looked away, it jumped to 9:42 a.m., then back again. Dead battery? Broken watch? I didn't know. It was just weird. I decided not to linger in that spot. After a quick breakfast of energy bars, I packed my gear. My plan was to cut over the ridge and meet the official trail that supposedly ran parallel to the Great Gulf headwaters. Then, I'd loop back toward the visitors' parking area, maybe a day or so early, just to be safe. But as I followed what looked like a ridgeline on the map, I realized the terrain didn't match. Everywhere I went, I found myself back at that same dried creek 3 times. The third time, I walked for what felt like an hour up a steady incline, only to break through a cluster of birch trees and see the crumbled ruin I'd left behind. Remus's reaction told me I wasn't losing my mind. He started whining the moment we set foot near the old foundation again. That was when I met Eric Dahl. He came stumbling out from behind a patch of brambles, carrying a heavy backpack. He looked about my age, maybe a little older, with a thick beard and a confident stride that now seemed reduced to a limp. He had a bandage around his hand, and his eyes looked bloodshot, as though he'd been crying or hadn't slept in days. He noticed me and gave a tired wave, "Hey," he said. "You lost too?" I nodded, too startled to think of anything clever. "Yeah, this place. The map doesn't make sense. Did you see that old foundation?" He let out a shaky laugh. "Yeah, I spent the night there. Couldn't get my bearings. I'm trying to find a trail down toward Pinkham Notch. My GPS is going haywire." We started talking. He told me he'd come from the other side of the forest boundary and gotten disoriented. We both had the same problem. Gear wasn't working. The map was worthless. And something about this corner of the wilderness felt wrong. I could sense the relief in my own voice as I realized I wasn't going crazy alone. He followed me back to the ruins, against my better judgment, I guess, but I didn't want to leave him wandering alone. Besides, Eric seemed friendly. He had that easy manner about him, like maybe he was used to the outdoors. We started a fire, and for some reason the flames were normal now, no unnatural color. Remus relaxed a bit too, though he never let Eric out of his sight. Over that small cooking fire, Eric told me that he'd woken up once and found his tent wide open, as if someone had been rummaging inside. Nothing was stolen, but his stuff had been moved around. He also mentioned hearing a girl's voice at night, crying softly. It matched what I'd heard, but I didn't want to talk about it out loud. Talking about it made it too real. We both tried to put on brave faces, but I know we were spooked. After dinner, we hashed out a plan. At first light, we'd try heading southeast by compass alone, ignoring the glitchy GPS. Even if the map was wrong, if we stuck to a direction, we had to find a forest road or something eventually. If we put enough miles behind us, we couldn't circle back to the same place again. Right? Night fell, and the temperature plummeted. We decided to camp in the same area again, close enough for safety, but with some distance for privacy. I pitched my tent maybe 30 yards from Eric's spot, near the largest bit of ruin. The place had a weird magnetism. If I listened closely, I swore I could hear wind blowing across the stones, creating a soft, sad whistle. I remember turning in early, exhausted from a day of wandering. Remus curled up at my feet as usual. I drifted off into a restless sleep, dreaming of some distant humming. Then, near midnight, I bolted awake. Remus was gone. The tent flap was still zipped from the inside, which made no sense. I grabbed my flashlight, yanked the zipper open, and crawled out into the cold. My breath billowed in front of me. The moonlight made everything a pale, ghostly silver. My heart pounded. Where was my dog? Remus? I shouted, voice echoing through the trees. Silence. I ran toward Eric's tent. He was outside, fully dressed, shining his own flashlight around. He looked startled when he saw me. "Your dog's gone?" he asked, sounding genuinely concerned. "Yeah, he was just in the tent with me." I felt my pulse hammering in my temples, dread filling my chest. Remus didn't just run off. We split up to search the perimeter. At some point, I noticed the stones of the foundation had a strange shimmer in the moonlight. They looked slick, as if coated in fresh moisture, though I hadn't felt any rain or dew. That was when I saw footprints on the far side of the ruins. Barefoot prints, small, like a woman's or child's. They led away into the darkness. My first thought was, is somebody out here barefoot in this cold? Just as I was about to call out to Eric, I heard the worst scream of my life. A dog's high-pitched yelp, one of pain and terror. I recognized Remus's voice. There's a particular tone a wounded animal makes, and once you've heard it, it sticks with you forever. I sprinted, stumbling over roots and rocks, until I reached a clearing behind a cluster of pines. I found Remus there, lying on his side, eyes wide, panting in short, ragged gasps. Eric hovered over him, breath steaming. My dog's fur was matted in blood along his chest and neck. There was a wet-hot smell of copper, "What happened?" I yelled, kneeling by Remus. I was shaking too badly to think. Eric stared at me with an expression that was vacant. He was breathing fast, almost hyperventilating. "He attacked me," he said in a monotone. "I was just walking and the dog jumped." My dog could barely move. I tried to cradle him. In that moment, Remus looked at me, eyes full of confusion. Then he let out a final breath. I felt the tension slip from his limbs. Gone. I felt like a piece of me was torn out. I looked down and saw the blood on Eric's hands. He wasn't holding a weapon. His nails, though, were broken and red at the tips, like he'd used them to claw at Remus's throat. You killed him," I gasped, turning to Eric. My dog wasn't prone to random violence. Did Remus sense something? Why would he attack? Eric just stared, blinking too little. His lips parted in a strange half-smile. "He attacked me," he repeated. I had to. He wasn't even breathing hard anymore, which made it so much more chilling. I flinched at the sight of him and scrambled away from Remus's body. My hands shook violently. I wanted to scream or punch him, but there was something about Eric's expression that scared me to my core. He was so calm. "You're lying," I whispered, but I couldn't make myself do anything else. At that moment, I was paralyzed. He reached out for me, but I jerked back. "Come on," he said, voice slow, like he was measuring each word. We should bury him, then we can get out of here." I stumbled backward, then managed to stand. "Stay the hell away from me," I spat. My anger was overshadowed by raw horror. My own mind reeled, trying to rationalize a scenario where Eric was telling the truth. Yet the dog was dead, and Eric was acting as if it were no big deal. Even in that moment, part of me recognized something deeper. Eric's eyes seemed different. They were glassy, too bright, like someone wearing tinted contact lenses, and there was an odd tilt to his head. He repeated the phrase, "He attacked me again," but it came out in exactly the same cadence, like a machine replaying a recording. The wind picked up. Leaves rattled across the stones near us. My teeth were chattering, not just from the cold, but from shock. I glanced at Remus's body and felt sick. I couldn't just leave him lying there. But I also couldn't be near Eric. I told myself I'd come back for Remus. I turned and ran, away from the clearing, away from the ruins, anywhere but there. The dark swallowed me. I should have grabbed my pack, but I didn't. I just had the clothes on my back and the flashlight, plus a canteen clipped to my belt. My footsteps pounded on the earth, and every few seconds I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting Eric to be right there behind me. But I didn't see him. I have no idea how long I ran. Time felt distorted. The moon seemed to jerk across the sky. Sometimes it hid behind clouds, then reappeared in a new position. My breath burned my lungs. Eventually, I slowed to a walk, scanning with my flashlight until it started flickering. My boots got caught in tangles of roots and hidden dips in the ground. Then I realized something terrifying. I was back at the same dried creek. The same cluster of ruins loomed a few yards away. My footprints from earlier told the story. I'd run in a large circle. Before I could decide what to do, I heard a voice. "Jack? Jack? You out here?" It was Eric's voice, but it sounded layered, like there was another voice underneath it, whispering in tandem. I crouched behind a wall of stones, breathing hard. Something moved in the corner of my eye. I turned my head and saw a figure on the far side of the foundation. She wore a tattered dress, barefoot, hair plastered to her face as though wet. Even through the gloom, I could see she was young, maybe early 20s, if that. She walked carefully, arms wrapped around herself for warmth. "You can't keep running," she whispered, not looking at me but speaking in my direction. "He'll find you, he always does." I froze. The beam of my flashlight played across her. Her skin looked drained of color, faintly bluish in the cold. I noticed something else. She wasn't actually stepping over the debris. Her feet sometimes moved through the tips of the tall grass in a way that defied logic. My heart pounded. This was no normal human being. "Who are you?" I croaked, her lips parted. "Bridget," she said, so quietly that I had to strain to hear. Then her eyes, pale gray, flicked toward me. "Help me. I'm so cold. I drowned. She took a trembling step closer, arms extended. "Please, you have to help me." My hair stood on end. Something about the way she said drowned. Her hair wasn't dripping, and yet it looked limp, stuck to the sides of her face. I could see large blotches of shadow in her torso, as though the shape of her body didn't quite match. Part of me wanted to run again, but my legs refused to move. Fear pinned me in place. A sudden blast of cold air nearly knocked me off balance. I heard Eric's voice from behind me, dangerously close. "Jack, come back to the fire. It's so cold out here." I turned and caught a glimpse of Eric in the moonlight. He looked normal at first, though the blood on his hands was still visible. But as he stepped closer, his head jerked in small, unnatural motions, like a puppet on tangled strings. I realized he was smiling, mouth pulled too wide, showing too many teeth. That was when I did something irrational. I scrambled forward, around the foundation pit, to the far side of the old structure, placing it between Eric and me. As I did, Bridget vanished like a wisp of smoke. She just melted into the darkness. Eric's voice rang out, echoing, "Jack, come on, don't be difficult." He was so close now I could smell the tang of blood. "It's not so bad, you know, she's just hungry." My throat tightened. Hungry? For what? I tried to remain silent. I scanned the ground for any kind of weapon, my flashlight beam flickering enough to make me curse. I saw a half-buried stick, or maybe a bone, near the corner of the foundation pit. As I reached for it, the wind changed direction, swirling around me in a dizzying gust. A moment later, Eric's face popped into view over the crumbling stone wall. He stared down at me, eyes reflecting the moonlight with a spectral glow. "They always fight it at first," he said, mouth forming the words slowly. "Then they accept it. Then the loop closes." I swung the object I'd grabbed. It was no stick. It was some kind of old animal bone, bleached white, maybe from a deer or moose. The blow took Eric by surprise, striking him across the chin and making him slip on the mossy edge. He fell forward with a grunt, arms flailing, and plunged down into the foundation pit. I heard him crash among the rocks and let out a guttural cry. I wasn't brave enough to wait for him to get back up. Instead, I climbed out of that ruin, the bone clutched in my shaking hand, and fled once more into the night. My mind was in chaos. My dog was dead. A barefoot ghost was lurking somewhere. Eric was possessed, or something, and trying to lure me into a trap. And the worst part, I had no idea how to escape. Every direction led me back here like the forest was folding in on itself. Desperation fueled me. I forced myself onward, ignoring the twisted paths. If I kept going, eventually I'd find a break in the trees, or at least get far enough away that the hold of this place might loosen. Right, that was my plan. But the forest had other ideas. I don't know how many hours I wandered. I saw the sky lighten at one point, only to have it fade back into night within minutes. My watch was useless. My sense of time unraveled. Each time I caught sight of the ruins or the creek bed, I felt like I'd failed some test and was forced to start over. I was freezing. My coat was back at my camp, along with my heavier supplies. My canteen was half empty. My stomach ached with hunger. Somewhere, in that nightmare, I found a battered leather journal half buried in the debris. It was by pure luck. My foot struck something that gave a hollow thump, and I looked down to see a corner of the cover sticking out of the dirt. I recognized it as old, maybe 19th century, its pages thin, the edges water-stained. Inside were scrawled, near illegible entries in a curling script. October 9th, 1892. Father's fever is worse. The storm has come again. He says the girl is to blame. Her crying echoes at night. If only we could leave these cursed grounds, but the path always takes us back. I flipped through more pages, my breath fogging in the cold night. Further along, another entry caught my eye. Bridget is gone. They found her near the creek, hair soaked, eyes open, not breathing. But her body does not decay. She stands at my bedside sometimes, pleading for help. I cannot escape. The old well is sealed with a stone. The ground hungers for us all. I heard a crack of branches behind me and nearly dropped the journal. Was it Eric? I heard heavy breathing, but I didn't see a shape. Then the voice came. "Help me," Bridget said, her words soft. "I can't breathe." I whirled. The beam of my flashlight settled on her figure a few yards away, half hidden by a gnarled birch tree. I still couldn't see her face clearly. Her hair was plastered over her cheeks and her head was tilted down. But a thin trickle of something dark ran from the corner of her mouth. Water or blood, I couldn't be sure. My terror spiked. I fumbled the journal, pressing it to my chest like some kind of shield. She took a tentative step forward, raising her face. "Jack," she whispered, "I know your name." Her lips curved in what might have been sadness or something more sinister. "He'll kill you too. Then you'll be stuck with me." I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance. "I don't want to be stuck," I managed to say. I want to leave." "We all do," she murmured. The wind carried her words like a faint echo, but the loop doesn't break, unless someone does something truly terrible. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but the words died in my throat. She shifted her stance, looking over my shoulder. "He's coming." I turned, dread pulsing in my veins. Eric stood maybe 30 feet away, a black silhouette against the faint moonlight. He looked all wrong. His posture crooked, one shoulder higher than the other, neck tilted. I remembered pushing him into that pit. The bone in my hand was my only weapon. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, voice cracking. Eric made a strange choking sound, then coughed. "Don't you see, Jack?" The timbre of his voice wavered, like two people were speaking at once. "She can't rest. We can't leave. The loop needs new blood." He raised his arms. "Feed the ground. Close the circle." I realized then that in his left hand he held my dog's collar. I could still see a few patches of Remus's fur clinging to it. Something inside me shattered. Anger flared, hot and immediate, cutting through my fear. "You son of a—" I began, but my voice choked on a sob. I felt tears burning in my eyes. A wave of guilt crashed over me. I should have protected Remus. In that instant, I made a decision. If this was the end, I'd go down fighting. I squared my shoulders and gripped the bone. Eric came forward in a shambling run, mouth open in a silent snarl. I heard laughter echoing from all around, not from Eric's mouth, but from the trees themselves. It felt like the forest was mocking me. He lunged. I dove to the side, swinging the bone. The blow glanced off his shoulder with a dull crack. He staggered, let out a hiss, and turned to face me, eyes blazing. I noticed the skin on his chin was split where I'd struck him before, but no blood flowed, just blackness, like a shadow under his flesh. "Stop running," he growled. "Accept your place." I had no intention of listening to that. He rushed at me again, faster than before, and I thrust the bone forward like a spear. To my shock, it sank into him, through his jacket, through whatever was beneath. He let out a strangled gasp and crumpled to the ground. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then he started laughing. A wet, coughing laughter that turned into a shriek. "Thank you," he rasped. Then he stopped moving entirely, body limp. I didn't trust it, so I backed away, adrenaline surging. A moment later, he dissolved into a swirl of black ash, leaving an empty set of clothes behind. My heart hammered so violently that I thought I might faint. None of this made sense. People don't just disintegrate. But something about the air changed. It was as if the forest breathed a long, slow sigh. I had just killed a man, or something that wore a man's face. I felt sick to my stomach. If Eric had been truly possessed, was there any chance I could have saved him? I sank to my knees, trembling, tears streaming down my cheeks. My dog was gone. I was alone in a forest that defied reality. I clutched the canteen and took a long, ragged drink, not caring that I might waste the last of my water. A presence formed behind me. I turned quickly, half expecting Bridget or some new horror. Instead, I saw a faint figure wearing a long skirt, old-fashioned. I couldn't make out the face, but I sensed a profound sadness emanating from it. The ground beneath the figure was churning slightly, like soil turned by invisible hands. Then a flicker of light flared from the old foundation, off in the distance, blue fire dancing along the stones. I heard a moan, as though from deep within the earth. Then the figure vanished. Despite my fatigue and terror, I walked, almost in a trance, toward the ruin again. This time, the dryness of the creek had been replaced by a thin trickle of water, glinting like silver. And the foundation's interior was alight with flickering flames that shifted between blue and green. The smell of rotting vegetation and something sulphurous assaulted my nose. At the center of the ruin, a tangle of black roots heaved, forming a twisted mass. I realized it was the old well, perhaps capped, but never properly sealed. The top had cracked open, letting the flickering light from below shine through. A resonance of countless screams echoed from within. My hair stood on end. This was the source. This was the loop. This well connected to something hideous, and it was fueling this endless cycle. One corner of the ruin had collapsed inward, leaving a wedge of stone that looked dangerously precarious. In a half-delirious state, I pulled my lighter from my pocket. I rummaged around, looking for something flammable. My backpack was still gone, but I spotted a small stash of half-burned wood by the old campsite, probably from when Eric and I had shared a fire. I gathered what I could, stacking it near the opening of the well. The stench intensified. I recalled how the fire had turned blue the first night, as though there was some flammable chemical or gas. Maybe I could destroy it, close the loop, or at least sever the connection. Part of me no longer cared if I made it out alive. I'd lost Remus, I'd murdered Eric, or the thing that used him. If I had a chance to end this evil, I had to take it. I flicked the lighter, and sure enough, the flames leapt to life, swirling in shades of green, purple, and blue. It was mesmerizing, an otherworldly display. The roiling mass of roots and the well's opening hissed. A terrible shriek rose from within, like 1,000 voices in agony, rattling my eardrums. The fire caught quickly, as though the entire ruin was soaked in gasoline. I staggered back, heat blasting my face. Flames crawled up the stones. A towering plume of black smoke rolled skyward. A shape emerged in the swirl of heat. Bridget, or the ghost that had once been Bridget. She screamed silently, face contorted in rage. Then the stones collapsed, sealing the well with a thunderous crash. The wind roared, and the entire structure glowed an eerie emerald color before collapsing inward on itself with a final wailing echo. I was thrown backward by the force, landing hard on my tailbone. For a second, I blacked out. When I came to, the fire was dying down, replaced by a pool of glowing embers. The unnatural colors were gone, replaced by ordinary red coals. My head pounded. My clothes smelled like smoke and sweat, but I was alive. The forest was dark and silent. The moon hung low in the sky like a pale coin, but it seemed normal. I looked around, expecting to see Bridget's ghost or Eric's twisted grin. Nothing. Just me, the stones, the embers. I dragged myself to my feet, every muscle aching. Without Remus, I felt unmoored, as though I'd lost my anchor to reality. A wave of grief washed over me, and I had to clamp my jaw to keep from crying out. Eventually, I began to walk. The darkness was still thick, but something about it felt less hostile. I looked at my watch, 4:12 a.m. The numbers stayed steady, no weird flickering. The compass app on my phone was still useless. The battery was apparently dead, but I remembered what Eric and I had planned. Follow a compass direction. My old magnetic compass was, thankfully, clipped to my belt. I set it for southeast and started moving, trying to keep a consistent pace. Within an hour, I found an old forest road that cut through the trees in a gentle curve. Relief and exhaustion nearly knocked me over. I kept going, forcing one foot in front of the other, ignoring the throbbing ache in my body. Eventually, as dawn colored the sky, I stumbled upon a sign. Great Gulf Link Trail. I recognized the name from my initial route planning. I managed to keep walking until I reached a small ranger's outpost. It was locked, but I waited there, dozing in and out of a panicked half-sleep until the rangers found me. When they did, I was a wreck. Filthy, bloody, dehydrated, telling a wild story about a ghost and a possessed hiker, raving about my dog. The rangers listened, but I could see the disbelief in their eyes. They asked about Eric Dahl, but no one had seen or heard of him. They wanted to help me, but they also clearly thought I'd had a psychotic break. They airlifted me to a hospital in Gorham. My injuries were mostly bruises, cuts, and signs of extreme exhaustion. The doctors recommended a psychiatric evaluation. I left the hospital after a few days, still grieving for Remus, with no real answers for anything that had happened. A month went by. My nightmares were frequent. I'd see Eric's blank smile or Bridget's pale face, or I'd relive the moment of Remus's last breath. I quit my job. I couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying everything, trying to find a rational explanation. Then, in mid-November, a package arrived at the small studio apartment I'd rented after I left Boston. There was no return address. Inside was Remus's collar, washed clean, free of blood. The metal tag still bore his name. I stared at it for hours, tears burning in my eyes. Who had sent it? Why? I stepped into the bathroom to splash water on my face. When I looked up into the mirror, I realized I wasn't blinking. My eyes felt dry, but I just kept them wide, unblinking, for far too long. My reflection didn't move quite in sync with me. I felt my stomach drop. Reaching up, I tapped my cheek gently. My reflection copied me. Maybe half a second later. Could I have imagined that? I squeezed my eyes shut, turned off the bathroom light, and sank to the floor. My heart hammered. My thoughts whirled with a single question. Had I really escaped the loop, or had I just brought it back with me? I can't shake the feeling that Bridget's final scream, Eric's black ash, the well's collapse. It was a victory, but incomplete. Something lingers. Sometimes I see a flicker in the corner of my eye, a barefoot figure on the street at night. Sometimes I notice that I've lost minutes or hours without explanation. Maybe the loop never truly ends. Maybe I merely delayed it. Maybe it's inside me now, and the next time I look in the mirror, someone else will stare back. For all my hopes of closure, I'm stuck living with the dread that none of this is really over, and that it never will be. My name is Alan Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and these events took place in the early spring of 2023. I've spent every day since trying to convince myself it was all some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion or breakdown in my mental health. But pieces of physical evidence keep telling me otherwise, and I can't run from the nightmares that come each night, nightmares that might just be memories. I'm not a soldier or anything like that. My life was always quiet, and I liked it that way. I grew up in a suburb just north of Boston. I'm a freelance graphic designer, usually hunched over a laptop at coffee shops or at my small apartment downtown. My doctor and therapist suggested I try something new, recommended I get away from screens. So, when I discovered these scenic photos of the mountains in Jackson, New Hampshire, I bought a cheap backpacking set and decided I'd go on a 4-day hike. I chose a place I had read about in some local hiking forums, Black Mountain Forest in Jackson, right near the edges of the White Mountain Range. I wanted to avoid the more crowded parts of the White Mountain National Forest, partially because I needed solitude, partially because I thought it'd be easier to focus on clearing my head. The few mentions of Black Mountain Forest described it as beautiful but rugged, with old logging roads overgrown by thick pines and a few abandoned foundations from centuries past. It sounded perfect for a little soul-searching. I planned this trip meticulously. My dog, Duke, a black Labrador I'd raised since he was a puppy, would come along. I'm a city guy at heart, so I was pretty nervous, but between the dog, my gear, and a can of bear spray, I figured I'd be just fine. And if the anxiety flared up, I could always hike back early. But none of those neat plans ever accounted for what I'd discover out there, or how drastically everything could unravel. I arrived on a gray afternoon, the sun hidden behind thick clouds. The parking area off Black Mountain Road was no more than a dirt patch with enough space for maybe 3 cars. Mine was the only one there. Trees soared in every direction, some with budding leaves just starting to show, others still bare from the winter. A damp, decaying smell rose from piles of rotting leaves, giving the woods a sense of quiet menace I initially wrote off as ordinary forest gloom. I put on my pack, clipped Duke's leash, and locked my Subaru. The sign at the trailhead was half rotted, the words Black Mountain Trail barely legible. Beyond that, the path quickly became little more than a corridor of pine needle carpet. I felt a sudden wave of excitement as Duke and I set out, like I was about to prove to myself I could handle the wilderness. The therapist's voice in my head told me to breathe, to focus on the moment. I tried. Within the first hour, a sense of unease whispered at the edges of my mind. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Even the typical chirps and rustles seemed muted. My phone still showed a few bars of signal, so I used it to track my progress on a downloaded map. The path aligned with what I'd planned, so I brushed away the anxiety. At some point, I came across what looked like an old stone foundation, mossy, half collapsed, with a chimney that stood like a broken tooth. I took a couple of photos. Duke growled softly at the foundation, but I figured he smelled some old animal scent. After a water break, we continued deeper into the forest. By late afternoon, I decided to set up camp on a flat patch of ground near a small brook. Light was fading under the canopy, turning the world gray and shapeless. A chill settled in my bones, but I told myself it was normal for early spring. I gathered some kindling, laid it in the fire pit I built from scattered rocks. Despite the dampness, I managed to coax a small blaze to life with my lighter and the help of some dryer lint I'd brought as tinder. Duke curled up beside the tent while I heated a can of beans. The quiet overcame me, but I was still more curious than frightened. The hush of nature, the trickling water. It felt like I was living inside a postcard. My nerves started to settle. I remember telling Duke that we'd made a good call, that maybe we'd do this more often if it went well. But then, just as dusk fully claimed the forest, my fire sputtered. I tried to add more twigs, but the flames died abruptly in a hiss of steam-like smoke, as if someone had poured water on it. For a second, I thought I saw a spark of greenish light in the embers. Then it was gone, and the pit was cold. The hair on my arms stood on end. I tried again, piling on new tinder, using nearly half a box of matches. Every single match lit, sparked, and died within seconds, not even catching the twigs. In frustration, I pulled out my lighter. The flame popped to life, but snuffed out as soon as I lowered it toward the pit. It was bizarre. Eventually, the wood ignited enough to smolder, but it never rose into a real fire. More of a feeble glow, like wet coals. I blamed the dampness, but a growing knot of unease had taken hold. I decided to call it a night. Duke and I crawled into the tent. I felt safer with the zipper closed, the fabric forming a thin barrier between us and the unsettling darkness. Duke seemed tense, but he eventually lay his head on his paws. I think I fell asleep after an hour or so, lulled by exhaustion. I woke to silence. It was pitch black, maybe a little after midnight. I strained my ears. Not a single insect, not a single rustle in the underbrush. Then Duke let out a low whine. My heart pounded as I groped in the dark for the flashlight. When I flicked it on, Duke's ears were upright, eyes fixed on the tent wall. I listened. Quiet footsteps in the leaves, a pattern of slow, deliberate crunches. They circled the tent. Could have been a deer, I told myself. But then they stopped directly behind me, on the opposite side of where Duke was focused. The dog spun, panting in fear rather than excitement. Grabbing my bear spray, I unzipped the tent a tiny crack and shone my flashlight out. The white beam revealed only thick underbrush. No eye shine, no figure. Silence again. I waited. After what felt like forever, no more footsteps came. I sealed the tent, not sure if I was more afraid of some animal or my own paranoia. Eventually, I fell back asleep. In the morning, I found footprints around the camp. They were half-worn boot prints, almost identical in size to my own shoes. For a second, I thought they were my footprints, but I'd never circled the tent like that. They formed a perfect ring. A strangled feeling rose in my chest, so I busied myself by boiling water. This time, the fire started on the first try, though it burned orange with occasional flickers of strange blue. I chalked it up to chemicals on the wood or something. You believe a lot of convenient explanations in the daylight. I decided I'd push forward with the loop. I still had 3 days, and I told myself I would be damned if I gave in to nerves. My phone had about 50% battery left, but the GPS map occasionally glitched. Every so often, the blue dot would slide off the trail or freeze. I assumed it was poor reception. Duke was less enthusiastic, though. He kept his tail low and his nose to the ground. The path narrowed, weaving through clusters of old-growth pine. Gnarled roots snaked across the soil, and the air smelled of damp earth. We hiked for hours, crossing a small stream, ascending a gentle ridge. Around noon, we paused at a rocky outcrop. From there, I could see far into the valley. Hundreds of treetops undulating in the breeze and looming shadows of distant peaks. It was breathtaking, but I also noticed the sky. It flickered between bright gray and near darkness, as if clouds had just swallowed the sun. Yet there weren't many clouds overhead. It was like time itself was stuttering, day blinking toward evening, then snapping back to late afternoon. Duke whimpered at it. I found myself checking my watch, 12:02, then a moment later, 1:15. I stared at the watch in disbelief. Could I have misread it the first time? Possibly, but the seeds of dread were planted. We pressed on. I intended to make it to a small lake I'd seen marked on the map. As the afternoon progressed, the trail signs I expected never materialized. Instead, I found a single wooden post carved with an arrow. The arrow pointed left, but my map said we should go right for the lake. Confused, I double-checked everything. The environment around me looked different from the satellite pictures. I should have seen a wide footpath, yet I was basically bushwhacking. Then the map app froze, the phone's screen flickering. I tried to restart it. Nothing. I pressed and held the power button. The phone went black. No sign of life, even though it had half a battery moments ago. I swore under my breath. Duke barked, startled by my frustration. I decided to trust my sense of direction, forging right. The forest thickened, with brambles snagging on my pant legs and clumps of dead trees, toppled by storms or old age, blocking the way. My arms got scratched, and Duke had to leap over fallen trunks. The more we struggled, the more I felt this creeping sense that someone was watching me. Pine needles rained down occasionally, as if stirred by some presence overhead. At one point, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, just a flicker of a shape among the trees. It vanished before I could focus. By dusk, we still hadn't found the lake. We did, however, come upon another ruin, a partial cabin with collapsed walls. The roof timbers lay in a jumble. A rusted axe head, separated from its handle, stuck out of the debris. A path of flattened grass suggested someone had passed through not long ago, or maybe an animal. I debated setting up camp inside the ruin, but it felt wrong somehow, like trespassing in a grave. So we moved on until we found a small clearing. I pitched my tent quickly while light still lingered. I spread out my gear, grimacing at how damp everything was from pushing through the brush. I even checked my bag for leaks because it smelled off, like something rotting. My food pack seemed okay, though. I told myself it had to be damp leaves clinging to the fabric. That night, the forest's hush weighed on me like a living thing. I tried to start a fire. Same trouble as before. The flame just wouldn't catch. I used nearly all my matches and got only faint sputters. Finally, after an excessive struggle, the kindling ignited, but the fire never became more than a sullen glow. I ended up eating a cold meal. Duke ate his kibble without the usual enthusiasm. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the wind in the trees, like whispers, but too rhythmic, too deliberate. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under. The second night changed everything. It was around midnight when I jolted awake to Duke's growl. He was standing at the tent door, hackles raised, teeth bared. Before I even realized what was happening, he lunged, snagging the zipper in his teeth and yanking it open. He burst out into the darkness, leaving the tent flapping behind him. Heart hammering, I scrambled out in a daze, calling after him. My flashlight beam flickered, revealing glimpses of lurching shadows. "Duke!" I shouted, stumbling through the underbrush. The ground was uneven. I nearly sprained my ankle on a half-buried rock. For a minute, I heard Duke barking furiously, but the sound was distant and echoey. Then, just as suddenly, silence. I searched in circles, panic clawing at my throat. I called his name until my voice cracked, but only the wind answered. I realized I had no idea how far I'd run from camp or which direction. The flashlight cast a trembling circle of light that seemed to make the blackness beyond even deeper. Then, across a narrow ravine, I glimpsed Duke. He was standing on the opposite side, about 20 yards away, stiff-legged, staring into the shadows of a giant pine. His posture radiated terror. I stepped forward, shining the light. That's when I saw the figure. The hair on my arms rose. It looked like me. Same height, same coat, same stance. It was facing Duke, arms at its sides. Its face was hidden by the angle of the flashlight, but I saw enough to know it wore the exact same jacket as I did, the same color of hiking pants. My voice trembled. "Who's there?" I aimed the beam right at it. The figure pivoted its head, letting me see a glimpse of a face. It was my face, slack and expressionless. Duke barked and lunged. The figure stepped backward into the darkness, like it had melted. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, leaving only an empty space. Duke whined, tail low, before running deeper into the forest after it. I wanted to chase him, but I hesitated, fear rooting me. In that second of indecision, the forest swallowed Duke's sound completely. I stood there, alone, half delirious with fear. Eventually, I realized I was shaking uncontrollably. If I kept stumbling through the forest, I'd get hopelessly lost. The best plan, I reasoned, was to return to the tent and wait for daylight. Duke had a good sense of smell. He was strong. He'd find his way back. The logic felt hollow, but I clung to it. My walk back to camp was torture. Every tree looked like a silhouette of a person. The darkness twisted my flashlight beam into illusions at the edges of vision. I was certain something was tailing me, but each time I whirled around, there was nothing but pine needles and shadows. When I reached the tent, my sleeping bag was lying half in, half out, as though something had dragged it. Feeling exposed and terrified, I pulled it inside, zipped up, and pressed my back to the corner, pepper spray in hand. Sleep never really came. I spent the remaining hours in a restless haze. Dawn provided no comfort. Duke was still missing. I circled the clearing, calling his name, finding no trace except for some paw prints in mud. After a while, I couldn't tell if I was following old prints or new. My throat felt raw from shouting. Panic gnawed at me. My only solace was that Duke had a collar with tags and my phone number, though my phone was dead. Suddenly, that fact felt catastrophic. If someone found Duke, how would they contact me? I decided to head back the way I had come. Forget the loop. I wanted to reach my car, drive until I found cell service, and call the local rangers. I'd come back with a search team if I had to. The idea gave me a sliver of hope. I packed up quickly, leaving nothing behind except footprints and my half-burned kindling. But the trail was unrecognizable. The map was useless now that the phone was dead. As I pushed through the dense brush, I realized I'd somehow gotten turned around. Instead of gradually descending, the terrain led me to a thick, low-lying swamp. I struggled to find higher ground. At one point, I tripped on a protruding root and spilled the contents of my backpack into the mud. My water bottles rolled away, coated with slime. The smell was foul, rotten eggs mixed with decaying vegetation. Worse yet, my food pouches had either burst open or started to rot. I pulled out a protein bar to find it covered in fuzzy mold. Another bag, which had instant noodles, was completely disintegrated. As though weeks had passed, a sour wave of nausea hit me. How could it have gone bad so quickly? I spent hours searching for a route out of the swamp. Eventually, I stumbled upon a faint trail, more of a deer path that climbed up a slope. I followed it, desperate for any sign of normalcy. The land flattened out again and the forest thickened. My heart hammered, half from panic, half from exhaustion. Mid-afternoon, I heard voices. Relief flooded me. I shouted, "Hello, over here," and charged toward the sound. I emerged into a small clearing to find a man kneeling by a smoldering fire, rummaging through a battered backpack. He looked up calmly, his face lined with dirt. He wore heavy boots, cargo pants, and a flannel shirt under a ragged jacket. His hair was close-cropped, showing a strong brow and sunburned cheeks. The lines around his eyes suggested he was in his 40s. "Easy there," he said in a friendly tone. "You lost?" My mind spun. Yes, I can't find my dog. My phone is dead. I've been trying to get back to the trailhead. He nodded, standing up. Name's Caleb Maddox, he said, extending a hand. Been out here a while. I shook it, noticing how his palm felt cold. Alan, I replied, how do I get out of here? Caleb gestured to a makeshift shelter near a large pine. I've got a small camp set up. I can show you a route I know, but it's a trek. You look half dead. Why don't you rest up, maybe eat something? I hesitated, but the mention of food lured me. My stomach had been growling for hours, and all my supplies were contaminated or ruined. Caleb rummaged in his pack, pulled out a can of chili, and popped it open with a multi-tool. He warmed it over his fire. Even though it looked slightly off color, my hunger overcame my suspicion. I told him about Duke, about the weird figure that looked like me, about the footsteps around my tent. A flicker of something crossed Caleb's face as he listened, a bit too calm. Could be you saw your reflection, he offered vaguely. Or someone messing with you. The forest can play tricks on the mind. He handed me the chili, which tasted metallic but sated my hunger. As I ate, he sat across the fire watching with an odd half-smile. Duke's absence felt like a weight on my chest, and I kept glancing into the trees, silently praying he would appear. Before dark, I decided to trust Caleb. There was no better option. We walked a short distance to a place he said was flatter and safer for the night. He helped me pitch my tent. Duke's empty leash sat coiled inside, mocking me. After I laid out my sleeping bag, I realized the entire tent smelled of that same damp rot. I tried to wipe it down, but the smell wouldn't leave. Caleb started his own fire effortlessly, as if the wood was bone dry. I found it strange, considering all my troubles. The flames danced tall, orange, and crackling. I know these woods, he said. They get real weird after dark. Pioneers used to talk about witches and curses. Doesn't matter if you believe it or not, things happen. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push it. Exhaustion pulled at me. We turned in early. I felt some relief having another human around, or so I thought at the time. Duke was still missing, but maybe tomorrow we'd run into him on the trail out. That was my hope. That night was a swirl of surreal fear. I awoke to a noise, the sound of whispering near Caleb's fire. It was low, rhythmic, like chanting. Heart in my throat, I crawled to the tent's door and peeked out. Caleb was hunched over the fire pit, feeding it small bones. I couldn't tell if they were animal or something else. His lips moved with silent intensity. The flames burned higher, casting wild shadows that danced across the trees. Then, in a quick movement, he snapped a bone in two and tossed it into the blaze. The fire let out a hiss, briefly flaring an unnatural green. I stifled a gasp, retreating inside. My heart hammered so loud I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to confront him, but terror pinned me. What would I even say? I told myself maybe he was just burning leftover scraps from a meal. But the green flame... I must have drifted in and out of a restless half-sleep. Sometime before dawn, I heard him rummaging outside. Then everything went quiet. When morning came, I unzipped my tent cautiously. Caleb wasn't there. No sign of him or his gear. The fire pit was filled with ash and shards of bone, the outer edges burned black. Dread stabbed me as I saw Duke's collar wrapped around a low-hanging branch. The metal name tag reflected the pale light, mocking me. I rushed over, heart pounding. The collar was intact, but there were smears of something dark on the nylon, blood. It smelled pungent, almost sweet and rotten. My legs nearly gave out. Tears blurred my vision. Had Caleb done something to Duke? I called Duke's name until my voice cracked, but heard nothing. The forest was silent as a tomb. I decided then, get the hell out, find the rangers, get help. I wanted to believe Duke was still alive, but fear consumed me. But leaving was easier said than done. Every direction looked the same. My attempts to retrace steps failed. The sun hardly penetrated the thick canopy. I spent hours weaving through the forest, sometimes stumbling upon half-decayed cabins or stone walls, each place giving me a deeper feeling that these woods were ancient, guarded by something malevolent. Eventually, I found a faint footpath. My spirits lifted. I followed it until it led me to a bizarre clearing, a sort of circle ringed by old, shattered mirrors hanging from branches. Some were cracked into spiderweb patterns, others clouded by grime. They swayed in a gentle breeze, each reflecting a distorted version of me. A nauseating sense of déjà vu rushed over me, as if I'd been there before. In one of the mirrors, I watched my own reflection. But it didn't move in sync with me, it lagged by a split second. When I raised my arm, it was still at its side, only lifting a moment later. My reflection's eyes seemed empty. I turned away, a shiver creeping along my spine, and stumbled out of that clearing as fast as I could. Sometime in the afternoon, I found a shallow cave near a rocky outcropping. I climbed up, hoping for a vantage point to see the valley below. The view, however, was dominated by endless trees, and thick clouds made it difficult to see far. The sun's position was impossible to pinpoint. My watch read 1:10, then switched to 12:03 when I glanced again. Time was unraveling around me. I almost hurled the damn watch over the edge in frustration. While descending, I slipped on loose stones and gashed my leg. Blood soaked through my pant leg. The pain was sharp and real, a visceral reminder of how mortal I was in that wilderness. I fashioned a makeshift bandage from a spare shirt. My heart pounded at the thought of infection, but there was no way I could stop or find better supplies. I had to keep moving. In the late afternoon, if that meant anything anymore, I reached another stream and decided to refill my water. The water was cold, crystal clear, but had a metallic aftertaste. I forced it down regardless. My thirst was overwhelming. My body ached from fatigue. My mind felt ragged, as though I were crossing between dream and reality. I set up camp again, but the moment I tried to build a small fire, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was as though the air itself rejected the spark. I gave up, too exhausted to fight it, and settled into my tent with only a single flickering flashlight. My stomach twisted in hunger, but all my food was spoiled or lost. The best I could do was choke down some water and pray for daylight. Sometime deep in the night, I woke to the sound of my own voice calling for help. "Alan, over here!" It echoed from somewhere beyond the trees. For a wild moment, I thought maybe it was an echo of my earlier shouting or some delirium. But then it came again, clear and desperate. "Alan, help me!" I scrambled out of the tent, ignoring the terror that swirled in my gut. The voice was definitely mine. Not someone else with a similar timbre. It was me, down to the inflection. It beckoned me. The flashlight revealed a path between the trees, a corridor of branches that seemed to part just enough for me to pass. My name repeated, as though from a distance. I followed. The corridor funneled me straight to another ruin, a large, rotted cabin. The door was missing. The windows were black holes. My voice came from within, calling, "Help! Please!" I stepped inside. Rotting floorboards sank under my weight. Cobwebs draped corners, and a damp, moldy stench filled the air. The flashlight beam jittered over peeling wallpaper and collapsed furniture. Suddenly, the interior lit up with a flash of lightning, though I'd heard no thunder. In that brief illumination, I saw a familiar figure crouched in the corner. Dressed like me, features like mine, but half melted, as if reality were uncertain about its shape. Its eyes were black sockets. Then darkness returned. My stomach dropped. "Alan," it whispered, "stay." It lunged forward, arms stretching like shadows. I screamed, stumbling backward out of the cabin. My legs churned, adrenaline pumping until I tripped over a root outside and sprawled on the cold ground. When I glanced back, the figure lingered in the cabin doorway, staring with that blank face. Then I forced my legs to move, forced myself to run into the dark woods. I don't know how long I fled. Tree branches slapped my face, leaves crackled. Once or twice, I glimpsed something dashing through the corner of my vision, paralleling me. My flashlight flickered, threatening to die. My lungs burned, and I slowed only when my body refused to keep the pace. Eventually, I saw a flicker of orange light. A campfire. Could it be Caleb again? Or maybe another traveler? I crept closer, heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. The fire burned in a ring of stones, illuminating a single figure. It was Caleb, leaning casually against a fallen log, chewing on something. He looked up as I approached, his expression a mixture of amusement and annoyance. "Alan," he said, as though greeting an old friend. "You've been busy." Words failed me. Rage and terror warred inside my chest. "What did you do to my dog?" I demanded, voice cracking. He tilted his head. "You mean the collar? Where is Duke?" I stalked closer, brandishing the flashlight. It was a pathetic weapon, but adrenaline fueled me. "What the hell is going on here?" Caleb only smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too many, too sharp. "He came back," he said, as though that was a perfectly normal statement. "Don't worry about him, worry about yourself." I noticed that next to him on a makeshift spit was something that looked suspiciously like animal meat. My stomach twisted. I grabbed a chunk of burning wood from the fire, brandishing it like a club. "I swear, if you—" He stood abruptly. In the firelight, his features flickered, shifting, almost as if I was seeing him through two overlapping lenses. One was the rugged, friendly survivalist. The other was something else. "You'll be joining him soon," he hissed, or maybe something else spoke through him. His voice seemed to echo. I swung the burning wood. He darted back, expression twisting in a grin too wide for a human face. I glimpsed something in his shadow, a shape, elongated and bestial, though Caleb's body was still upright. Panicked, I hurled the torch at him. It struck his shoulder, scattering sparks. He flinched, let out a guttural snarl, then leapt toward me. I scrambled to the side, my foot caught a rock, and I went down hard. He loomed over me, breath reeking of decay. With a burst of animal panic, I yanked the bear spray from my pocket and unleashed it in his face. He howled, staggering backward. The noise was more of a high-pitched shriek than a human cry. I seized the moment, lurching to my feet, scanning for a weapon. My flashlight beam fell on a hatchet leaning against a tree, possibly his. I lunged for it. He slashed at my back with something, maybe a knife or his nails, but adrenaline dulled the pain. I grabbed the hatchet, spun around, and swung with every ounce of terror-fueled strength. The blade caught him in the leg. He dropped to one knee, shrieking. His voice warbled between human and inhuman. Black ooze seeped from the wound, thick and pungent like tar, not blood. He looked up, eyes pure white. "You can't escape," he hissed. "The forest won't let you." Despite the hatchet lodged in his thigh, he started to rise. Horrified, I yanked it free. The noise that followed was a wet, sucking sound that nearly made me retch. Then I ran. I didn't see if he followed, but I heard his ragged breathing behind me for a time. I sprinted until my lungs threatened to burst. I found myself staggering through a scattering of boulders, half delusional. Pain flared in my back from where he'd slashed me. My left hand felt numb. I needed to stop the bleeding, but fear drove me forward. Finally, I reached a cluster of rocks forming a narrow passage. At the far end, I saw an opening, like a small tunnel that might lead out, or at least to a different section of the forest. With no other option, I forced myself inside. I had to crawl on hands and knees, the stone scraping my already battered limbs. Halfway through, I heard something behind me, scraping on the rocks, breathing heavily. The passage was too tight to turn around, so I scrambled faster, frantic. Rocks cut my palms, the ceiling battered my shoulders. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, but eventually I spotted faint moonlight. I emerged, filthy, panting, into the open air. I recognized a bend in a dirt road. My eyes widened. This could be near the parking area where I'd left my car. A rush of hope lit my veins. I stumbled forward, ignoring the throbbing in my leg and back. The road was empty and dark, but the shape of it felt right. I limped along, praying I was close. Sure enough, after what must have been half a mile, I saw it, my Subaru, parked where I'd left it. Relief so profound it was almost painful spread through me. I made a final desperate push, collapsing against the driver's side door. I yanked the handle and it opened. I'd left it unlocked. Typical city-born stupidity, but this time it saved me from fumbling with keys. I tumbled in, slammed the door, and tried to catch my breath. Everything ached. My head spun. The forest loomed behind me, silent and watchful. With shaking hands, I tried the ignition. The engine sputtered once, then roared to life. Tears of relief filled my eyes. I didn't even care that I was leaving my tent or any gear behind. I just needed to get out, find help, find a phone. But the question of Duke tore at me. Was he still alive out there somewhere? A wave of guilt crashed over me, but I had no choice. I was barely alive myself. I fumbled for my phone charger, plugging the phone into the car's console. The screen remained black. I peeled out onto the dirt road, driving too fast. Adrenaline overriding caution. The headlights carved two pale tunnels through the trees, which pressed in from both sides. I was afraid the road would loop back into that cursed forest somehow, but after 20 minutes of nerve-wracking focus, I saw a sign for a state highway. Civilization. I spotted a gas station at the intersection. The place was dark, presumably closed. Still, there might have been a payphone. I pulled in, breathing ragged. The phone booth stood at the edge of the lot, a battered relic. I hobbled out of the car, blood sticky on my clothes, and lifted the receiver. No dial tone. Great. My phone was still lifeless. My entire body trembled. With no other option, I got back into the Subaru, drove until I found a small 24-hour convenience store. The fluorescent glow inside felt like stepping into another universe. I must have looked like a madman, covered in dirt and dried blood, eyes wide and frantic. The clerk asked if I needed an ambulance. I nodded yes, or maybe just collapsed. My memory is fuzzy there. I do recall them calling 911, hearing the distant wail of sirens and blacking out. I woke in a hospital bed the next day, or so I was told. My wounds were superficial, lots of stitches and deep scratches, but no nerve damage. They kept me for observation. The local authorities asked me questions about an assault in the woods. My answers were chaotic. A missing dog, a man named Caleb who might have attacked me, seeing illusions. I'm sure I sounded unhinged. They said they'd send a search party. They asked for details, but it was all I could do to stammer out the approximate coordinates from memory. Days passed. My phone never turned back on, even plugged into every charger the nurses had. The search team found no sign of anyone named Caleb. No sign of a campsite or a man with a leg wound. No sign of Duke either. I pressed them to look harder, but the rangers said the forest was vast and unregulated. They'd keep an eye out, but the official line was, "We can't find your dog, sir. We're sorry." Eventually, I was discharged. The local deputy gave me a lift back to my car, which had been towed to a nearby service station because I'd left it in a random store lot. On the drive, he tried to console me. Sometimes dogs find their way back, or a local might pick him up. I nodded without real hope. I spent another week in a motel, scanning local message boards, printing flyers with Duke's photo. Not a single lead. Each day, the memory of the forest haunted me. My reflection in the mirrors. The impossible time shifts, Caleb's voice twisting into that unholy screech. And the worst, Duke's collar stained with blood. The heartbreak was immeasurable. One morning, on a whim, I plugged my phone in again in the motel room. It flickered for the first time since the forest. My pulse spiked. The battery icon glowed. Then it booted up. 25 new voicemails. All from family and friends, worried about me. The timestamps were bizarre. Some were from dates that hadn't even passed yet. But even more disturbing, a video file labeled with the exact date and time I left the forest. I pressed play. The screen showed the interior of my Subaru from the passenger seat's perspective. Nighttime. The angle was shaky, like the phone had been propped up by something. I was in the driver's seat, eyes locked on the road, face tight with fear. Then, after a moment, the me in the video looked over at the camera, but didn't say a word. He looked different. The corners of his mouth twitched into a slight grin. Meanwhile, in the passenger seat, another me was asleep, head lolling against the window, dried blood on his face. That me, the real me, seemed oblivious to being recorded. The driver kept glancing at him with a crooked smile. Suddenly, the screen pixelated, then froze. The audio spat static and cut off. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. If that was real footage, it implied something was in the driver's seat while I was unconscious in the passenger seat. Or it was some impossible hallucination. Either scenario made my stomach lurch. I replayed it again and again until my head pounded. I wanted so desperately to rationalize it. Camera glitch, or maybe I set the phone up on the dash in a state of shock, but there was no explanation for seeing two of myself, one awake and one asleep. No explanation for that horrifying smirk. I left New Hampshire the next day, driving home to Boston in a fog of dread. Every time I passed a reflective surface, car windows, mirrors at rest stops, I had to check and see if my reflection matched my movements. I lost count of how many times I panicked, half convinced I'd see that delayed reaction or that blank stare. At every turn I expected Duke to appear, or to see some figure wearing my face among the trees. I kept my eyes straight ahead, praying I'd escape the forest's grasp. My first night back in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. I just lay in the dark with the lights off, certain I heard footsteps in the hallway or scratching at the windows. I tried to turn on my phone, watch a show to distract me, but the screen refused to come on again. I left it plugged in all night, still nothing. There might have been a ringing tone, faint and distant, though my phone was dark. I drifted in and out of nightmares, waking with the sheets soaked in sweat. Days turned to weeks. The hospital bills arrived, and normal life demanded my attention. I tried to go about my routine, but I was different now. Jumpy, insomniac, haunted by intangible dread. My reflection always seemed a half-second out of sync, or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. I told the therapist some version of the story without the supernatural elements, focusing on the lost dog, possible attacker angle. She insisted it was a severe trauma reaction combined with extreme stress. That might be partially true, but I know there's more to it. Sometimes I dream that I'm back in Black Mountain Forest, standing at that ring of broken mirrors. Duke's there, on the other side, but when he turns, his eyes are dead white, and he just stares at me. Other times, I see that shape wearing my face, Stepping out from behind a tree, it always smiles too long. A few weeks after returning, I got a call from an unknown number. I picked up, heart pounding. Static crackled on the line. Then, for just a second, I heard a whisper, "Alan, come back." The line went dead, no caller ID. When I tried calling back, it was just an out-of-service message. I haven't heard it since. But the final straw happened 2 nights ago. I was sitting in my car in my apartment's parking garage trying to psych myself up to walk inside. The overhead fluorescence flickered, and in that strobe of light, I saw my own reflection in the side mirror. My reflection's eyes were closed. I was staring straight at the mirror, but in that half-second I noticed the reflection's eyelids were shut. Then, as the lights flickered again, they snapped open, and the reflection's mouth curled into a grin. I twisted around in the seat, frantic, but there was no one behind me. So, here I am, writing this all down before I lose my nerve or my sanity. I'm not sure if posting or sharing it will help. I keep wanting to say it must be some extended nightmare. But the hospital reports are real. The stitches in my flesh were real, and Duke is still missing. Deep in my heart, I fear the forest claimed him, just as it almost claimed me. Maybe he escaped. Maybe he's out there, hungry and scared. I don't know which possibility is worse, that he's lost, or that some twisted, wrong version of him is wandering those trees. I'm not certain if I truly broke free of that place. The illusions might be following me, waiting for me to slip up, to let my guard down. Some nights, I swear I hear footsteps pacing outside my apartment door, soft and deliberate. I peek through the peephole. No one's there. But I sense something waits just beyond my vision, wearing my face, smiling with that too long grin. I wish I had closure. I wish I could say that everything was fine once I got back home, but that's not the truth. The truth is, I left pieces of myself in that cursed forest. Maybe something else left with me. Maybe the timeline there was never right to begin with. Sometimes the clock in my living room speeds up or slows down, as if mocking me. Sometimes I feel a presence next to me, breathing in sync with my breaths. And every time I catch my reflection moving a fraction too late or too soon, I wonder if it's just my imagination, or if it's still with me, biding its time. I've considered returning to search for Duke. The thought terrifies me beyond words. Even if I tried, would I find the real forest or some distorted nightmare? And would I come back the same, or come back at all? My scars throb whenever I think about it. My therapist says to move on. My mind says to find my dog. My heart says if I go back, I won't escape again. If you're reading this, heed my warning. Black Mountain Forest in Jackson, New Hampshire is not a place you want to wander blindly. Something there warps reality. It hunts your fears, twists your perceptions, and leaves you with nightmares that never fade. I barely crawled out torn and bleeding. Others might not be so lucky. And if you ever see me, another me, walking the streets with that blank gaze or that twisted grin, don't trust it. Because I'm right here, writing these words, locked inside my own endless horror show. And I don't think it's finished with me yet. Oh, one. My name is Caleb Monroe, and I'm 32 years old. This happened in late October of 2024, during what I thought would be a peaceful trip to the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Even though my friends often tease me that I'm always in my head, I'm by no means a soldier or an extreme adventurer. I've never served in the military or done anything that would qualify me as a survivalist. I'm just a freelance wildlife illustrator who likes finding remote places to sketch and decompress. I believed this trip to Mount Kitt would yield new inspiration for my guidebook on nocturnal predators. I had no clue that I was walking straight into a nightmare. I brought my 6-year-old German Shepherd, Rex, with me. Rex was the one constant in my otherwise lonely life. We'd been inseparable since he was a pup, and though I'd never tested him in actual search and rescue missions, he came from bloodlines trained to sniff out and guard people in emergencies. He was protective, quick to sense danger, and at times even more intuitive than me. I trusted him more than I trusted myself. I'd chosen Kilkenny Ridge Trail because it was reputedly the most secluded route up Mount Kitt. Late October meant fewer hikers, which was perfect for me. More space to observe wildlife without the racket of big crowds. The forest around that part of the White Mountains can be eerily silent. That was what I wanted. Silence. Time alone to capture the shapes of foxes slinking between the hemlocks, or the silhouette of a moose at twilight. I imagined quiet nights by the fire, maybe journaling about the day's sightings. Just me and my dog, away from all the frantic noise of the world. Oh, the drive up from my apartment in Massachusetts took around 4 hours, through winding roads and gradually thinning traffic. Once I reached the gravel lot near the unknown pond trailhead, I parked, reorganized my gear. Tent, sleeping bag, some dried food, first aid kit, flares, a magnesium stove, and enough water to last us a few days. I strapped on my pack, clipped Rex's harness to my belt, and started up the path. At first, everything felt normal, even peaceful. The early afternoon sun filtered through the bony branches of trees, shedding leaves in vibrant bursts of red and orange. Rex trotted eagerly ahead, sniffing at damp logs and crunching through the undergrowth. I had my phone, a paper map, and a GPS device. Overprepared, if anything, but I liked having backup methods. The air smelled like pine needles and loam, exactly what I expected for a crisp fall trek. I'd barely been hiking an hour when I heard footsteps behind me. They were quick, purposeful. I turned to see a stocky man with a giant backpack coming my way, grin plastered on his face. He was about my age, maybe a couple of years older, with a short beard and an overly confident stride. "Hey there, man," he called, breathing a bit heavily. "Didn't expect to run into anybody else out here this time of year." I paused, letting Rex sit by my side. "Same here," I said, feeling both relieved and faintly annoyed. I'd wanted solitude, but he looked harmless enough. "I'm Trent," he said, offering a gloved hand. "Mind if I tag along for a bit? My group bailed last minute and, well, you know how it is." "Caleb," I replied, shaking his hand. Rex gave him a half-sniff, half-grumble greeting. "Sure, I guess. I'm headed up the Kilkenny Ridge Trail, gonna see about a campsite near Mount Kitt. If you don't mind me stopping occasionally to do some sketching." Trent shrugged. "No problem. I'm just out here for the personal challenge." It wasn't exactly the solitude I'd been hoping for, but part of me felt relief. Having another human around, at least for a while, might help break up the monotony. It could also be reassuring if anything went wrong. Some parts of the White Mountains are deceptively rugged. One twisted ankle can spell disaster if you're totally alone. So I let him walk with me. We chatted intermittently about trivial things. He seemed big into hiking gear, bragging about how he'd spent a fortune on a GPS watch that could give him topographical maps on the go. He commented on my older GPS device, calling it vintage, but stopped short of insulting me outright. Still, he carried himself with that brand of cockiness often found in men who've read too many adventure blogs. After a good 2 hours of steady hiking, the sun slipped lower, and we found ourselves crossing a narrow stretch of ridge lined with leafless birches. It turned windy fast, and the temperature dropped more than I'd expected. My plan was to set up camp soon. Trent, apparently, had the same idea. By mutual, unspoken consent, we stopped in a small clearing off the trail. The dirt was soft, scattered with pine needles. We started assembling our tents as the wind hissed through the pines. It almost sounded like a whisper, as if the forest were trying to tell us something, or warn us. Rex prowled around, ears constantly up, as though he sensed more than just the rustle of leaves. Occasionally, he'd stare into the tree line as if he'd glimpsed movement there. I saw nothing. Figured it might be a squirrel or a fox. At the time, I didn't think much of it. We got a small campfire going for dinner. Trent heated some dehydrated meal in a little pot. I ate a bag of freeze-dried chili, letting Rex gnaw on a jerky treat. The firelight flickered across the trunks of the pines, revealing glimpses of the forest's deeper shadows. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Usually you'd hear a few night creatures, maybe some insects or a distant owl. Instead, there was a hush, as if everything with a heartbeat had fled the area. Then the wind slowed and I realized the hush was total. I checked my phone for the time. 8:47 p.m. The battery symbol read half. That was normal enough. The screen was flickering, though, which was not normal. The temperature had dropped, but not below freezing or anything. I shrugged it off. Maybe I dropped it in the car. Then Trent said, "Do you see that?" I followed his gaze to the fire. The flames, which should have been the usual mix of orange and yellow, glowed a faint green at their tips. I frowned and poked the embers. "Probably some mineral in the wood," I murmured. "Copper or something like that. It happens." "Right," he said, but I could tell he didn't fully believe it. He adjusted his posture, crossing his arms tightly against the cold. "Just looks weird." That weirdness didn't go away. The flames continued flickering greenish. My phone screen glitched, blinking from half battery to full battery, then back. It was a mild inconvenience, but gave me a nagging sense of something being off. Eventually, we called it a night. Trent crawled into his tent with a quick good night, while I slipped into mine with Rex. The dog settled by my feet, head on his paws, letting out occasional growls at noises I couldn't hear. My own thoughts buzzed with an odd tension. My eyelids grew heavy, though, and soon I drifted off. Sometime in the dark, I woke to a sense of choking. My chest felt like a weight pressed onto it. I opened my eyes to pitch blackness, fumbling for my flashlight. Rex whimpered softly, though he sounded oddly muffled, as if there was a layer of something blocking him. I managed to click the flashlight on, shining it around the tent. Both of our sleeping bags were unzipped and lying open, but from the inside out, in a way that made no sense. The tent door was still zipped shut from the inside. We shouldn't have been able to open our sleeping bags like that without at least stirring. I flicked the beam onto Rex. He was trembling, ears flattened, watching me with wide eyes. Adrenaline spiked through me. Had someone come into the tent while we were asleep? I saw no footprints, no sign of intrusion. I scrambled to my knees to check the zipper at the front of the tent. It was still locked from the inside. But there was a stench, faint but nauseating, like stale meat or a damp dog that had been swimming in rotten water. It lingered for a moment, then vanished when I pulled back the flap. Nothing outside but darkness. I listened. Everything was silent, windless, no movement or voices, just a suffocating hush. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Maybe I'd sleepwalked. Maybe that explained the unzipped bags. The smell could have come from an animal that brushed against the fabric. I tried to rationalize it. Eventually, I laid back down, though sleep didn't come easily. In the morning, I blinked groggily at the pale sunlight filtering through the tent. Rex was curled by my feet, quiet and alert. Feeling relieved that it was finally day, I unzipped the door and stepped out to find Trent, who was already awake, rummaging in his pack. "Hey," I said. "You sleep okay?" Trent made a face. "Not really. My watch died and my phone's not charging. Also, check this out." My GPS says we're in Canada right now. I'm nowhere near the border, but it thinks we're in Quebec. Weird glitch. His phone, when he showed me, was flicking between different times. 3:14 a.m., 6:59 p.m., 11:21 p.m., though by the actual sunrise overhead, it had to be somewhere around 8 o'clock in the morning. I almost mentioned the strange occurrence with our sleeping bags, but decided not to. Something about it felt too personal, like I'd be revealing my vulnerability. Instead, I shrugged. Yeah, maybe the satellites are messed up. Let's keep going. If we see a better campsite, we can move on before we settle in again tonight. Trent agreed, so we broke camp quickly. I tried not to worry about the sense that something was off with the forest. The trees seemed too still, as though waiting for us to do something. I busied myself with repacking the tents, making sure everything was secure. We hiked for hours, following the ridgeline, which occasionally gave spectacular views of valleys below. But my sense of time was askew. My watch read 10:17 a.m. one moment, and then I'd glance again after what seemed like an hour of hiking to see it read 10:18 a.m., or the opposite. We'd walk a short stretch, and the watch would jump almost 30 minutes ahead. The sun seemed stuck at times, then racing across the sky. The illusions might have been the effect of passing clouds, but it unsettled me more than I cared to admit. Rex's behavior only heightened my unease. He kept pausing, turning his head sharply, ears pricked. More than once, he stopped to sniff the air, hackles rising. He'd let out a low growl, then surge forward, as if wanting to chase something that neither of us could see. Even Trent noticed, but he just made jokes about how the dog's going nuts. Eventually, we reached a small, flat area near a rock outcrop that looked suitable for a campsite. My phone's map was glitching, but the topography matched where I thought we might be, still a mile or two from the actual summit of Mount Kitt. We decided to break early, have something to eat, and consider whether we wanted to push farther or just set up camp. As we sat there, munching on our rations, I noticed how the sky had gone from bright to overcast in minutes, as if an invisible hand had smeared gray across the horizon. The wind picked up, swirling leaves in little tornadoes around our feet. Rex was restless, pacing the edge of the clearing, sniffing the ground. Trent stood, talking about how he wanted to scout for wood or a better vantage point. When Trent left with a casual wave, promising to be back in a few minutes, I realized my phone read 1:24 p.m. Then I got lost in drawing the shapes of the bare tree branches for 15 or 20 minutes, or so I thought. I glanced back at the phone. 1:25 p.m. That couldn't be right. I shook it, tapped it, but it was stuck. The analog watch on my wrist was no better, the second hand twitching in place. Thinking maybe the battery was dead, I tried ignoring it. Time dragged on. Rex whimpered, circled me again, looking into the forest. I eventually noticed something truly wrong. Trent had been gone way too long. I had no idea if he'd been gone for an hour or just a handful of minutes. Time was refusing to behave. But the daylight was definitely fading, the clouds thickening overhead. I felt anxiety rise in my throat. I forced myself to stand and call out his name. "Trent!" I shouted. My voice echoed in the silent pines, then died. Nothing. I waited, scanning the tree line, hoping to see him lugging a fallen branch or just wandering back with a sheepish grin. No sign of him. Rex nudged me, as if urging me to move. So I grabbed my flashlight, left my gear where it was, and walked into the forest, calling Trent's name every dozen steps. The hush was unnerving. Not a single bird call, no scurrying chipmunks. My breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot were the only sounds. Even the wind seemed absent. It didn't take long to realize I was going in circles. The grove of trees looked identical in every direction. I'd mark one with a slash from my pocket knife, then find it repeated up ahead, as though the same trunk had been copied and pasted. Rex began growling at random intervals, but I could see no motion among the shadows. My stomach churned. How far had we come from the campsite? After what felt like an eternity, a figure stepped out from behind a birch trunk. It was Trent. Relief flooded me, but it lasted only seconds. Something about him was off. His posture too rigid, his grin too wide. He greeted me with a drawn-out, "Hey, man," his voice like he had water in his throat. He stared at me with unblinking eyes. "Trent, are you okay?" I asked, approaching him carefully. Rex bristled at my side, lowering his head, teeth partially bared. Trent glanced at Rex with a slack-jawed expression, then back at me. "Where's the campsite?" he asked, a fraction too slow, as though each word had to be pulled out of his mouth. I motioned in the direction I thought the clearing lay. "Back this way." I forced a laugh. "Dude, you had me worried. How long have you been gone?" He cocked his head. 15 minutes. His eyes didn't move, just bored straight into mine, then flicked away. I wanted to say it had been more like hours, but I had no proof. My phone was worthless. The sun, where the hell even was the sun? Thick clouds masked the sky, making it impossible to guess the time. My chest felt tight. The forest closed in, each tree leaning forward like it was eavesdropping. Still, Trent followed me back to the clearing. We didn't speak much. He occasionally asked bizarre questions like, "Ever feel your bones moving?" I pretended not to hear him. There was an unsettling grin on his face whenever he asked, as though it were a joke only he understood. Finally, we reached the campsite, and I noticed how dull and gray the light had become. Maybe it was still late afternoon, or maybe it was nearing evening. I couldn't tell. We decided to pitch our tents there for the night, not wanting to risk searching for the summit in the potential dark. As I unpacked my gear, Trent stood off to the side, barely moving, staring at the trees. Twice I caught him just smiling. He'd glance at me and quickly look away. An icicle of fear formed in my gut. Something was deeply wrong with him. Dehydration, hypothermia, some mental break. We tried to start another fire, but all the wood refused to catch. Even with a lighter and a few strips of tinder, the flame would gutter out almost instantly. It was as if the wood was soaked inside, but it felt dry to the touch. Finally, I managed a small, flickering flame with my magnesium stove, just enough to heat water for a meal. Trent sat cross-legged, head lolling forward, occasionally humming a tuneless melody. I offered him some of my water, but he shook his head. I asked, "You sure you're all right?" He stared past me at Rex. "That dog," he said in a flat tone, "it's judging me." Rex responded with a low growl. That was the first time I'd heard him act truly hostile toward a person. I realized I needed to keep an eye on them both. If Trent was sick or delirious, he could be dangerous. Night fell in a slow, suffocating hush. The tiny flicker of flame gave little comfort, especially with that bizarre greenish hue dancing at its edges. I took out my flashlight, scanning the perimeter of the clearing, seeing only thick stands of conifers that seemed to watch us in silence. Every hair on the back of my neck felt electrified. Around what I assumed was midnight, with no functioning timepieces, I decided to try sleeping. Trent said nothing, simply crawled into his tent. The final image I had of him, as I zipped my own tent closed, was him kneeling there, staring at me through the narrow gap in his tent flap, eyes glassy. Rex and I curled up inside my tent again. I felt more exhausted than I'd ever been. My mind buzzed with anxiety, so I tried to force my thoughts onto mundane tasks. I pictured all the things I'd do once I got home. The sketches I still needed to finish, the bills I had to pay, that kind of thing. Gradually, my eyes grew heavy, and I sank into a restless sleep. I don't know how long I slept. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. But I woke to Rex's snarl close to my ear. He was at the front of the tent, facing the zippered door with his lips curled. Then he dashed through the flap, bursting outside. I scrambled after him, clutching my flashlight. Outside, darkness pressed all around. Trent's tent was empty, its flap wide open, no sign of him. Rex was gone too, having sprinted into the trees. My mouth went dry as panic set in. If Rex ran off chasing something, there was no guarantee I could find him in this forest. I shouted for him, hearing my voice echo until it vanished. The quiet swallowed me. I flicked the flashlight around, shadows dancing, nothing solid. Then I heard a short yelp, so sudden it shot adrenaline through me like a knife. I recognized that yelp. It was Rex. Something had hurt him. I sprinted toward the sound, weaving between trunks, letting the flashlight beam slice across the dark. Eventually, I found him. He was lying on his side near a massive pine, trembling. Half his fur bristled. I reached him in a panic. He was alive, though he whined in obvious pain. Under the flashlight, I could see a thin, bloody scratch across his flank. But what chilled me more than the scratch was the other presence near him. A pair of footprints in the mud, slightly elongated as though the person had bare feet with impossibly long toes. I had no clue who or what had attacked him. My only thought was to get him back to the campsite, treat his wound. As I put a trembling hand on his fur, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure behind a nearby birch. I pointed the flashlight, and there stood Trent. But the shape of him was wrong. His torso looked elongated. He was hunched, his arms too long at the elbows. He turned away as the beam hit him, then stepped behind the trunk and vanished. Except, he wasn't just stepping. I swear it was as though he melted into the darkness. Rex whimpered again, so I snapped back to him, whispering, "Easy, buddy," and carefully lifted him to a standing position. I coaxed him back to the clearing, but he was limping. My heart hammered with dread, but I had to keep it together. Once we reached the campsite, I found my first aid kit, cleaning the scratch. Oddly, it didn't look deep, more like a superficial cut from a branch, but it was angled and raw. The real worry was the way Rex was shaking, as if he'd seen something that shattered his nerve. I called out Trent's name, half hoping to see him return, half terrified he would appear again in that unnatural posture. No answer. I paced the campsite, scanning for any sign of him. My phone battery had died. The green edges in the campfire had died too, leaving behind only smoldering embers. The entire place reeked of that stale, rotten odor again. Rex kept his head down, glancing over his shoulder repeatedly. We ended up huddling close in the darkness until the earliest threads of dawn bled into the sky. By morning, assuming it was morning, the faint daylight gave the forest a colorless, washed-out look. Thick fog rolled between the tree trunks, swirling around our ankles. I dreaded what I might see in the daylight, like maybe we'd find footprints or a trail of blood leading somewhere. But beyond the place where I'd found Rex, the ground seemed undisturbed. Even the footprints were gone. It was as if the forest swallowed all evidence. I feared for Trent's safety despite his bizarre behavior. Whether possessed, deranged, or something else, he was still a living man out there. With a shaky resolve, I packed up the tents. The idea of continuing the hike to the summit was unthinkable now. I needed to get out, find help, or at least a phone signal. I tried turning my phone on again, but it was dead. No response whatsoever. My GPS device flickered nonsense. The topographic lines on its small screen kept rearranging themselves as though the terrain was shifting. The only real guide I had was my battered paper map. I decided to follow the trail back the way we had come, trusting that I remembered enough to navigate. But something about the direction felt wrong from the start. The trail signs, wooden placards hammered into posts, were not where I remembered them. Or, if they were, the lettering was different. Twice, I came upon a sign that read "Unknown Pond" with an arrow that pointed behind me, exactly opposite of what my memory said. The environment was all reversed. Rex strained at the leash, whining frequently. I was trying to keep my composure, but the creeping dread in my stomach grew with each step. Then the unimaginable happened. I spotted Trent's figure once more in the fog, just standing there among a cluster of pines. Without thinking, I walked toward him, calling, "Trent, are you okay?" Rex gave a short bark of alarm, but I pressed on. Trent was partially turned away. I saw the same elongated arms, the same posture, but it looked like his skin was splitting. There was a long tear down his side which twitched when I got closer. He turned. His face was no longer a simple human face. The skin was incomplete, as though a shell that only partially covered a twisted structure of bone and bark beneath. Eyes, yes, but more like the hollow sockets of a skull. His mouth moved strangely, forming words that weren't audible. I froze, unable to speak. Then the shape lunged behind a tree, dissolving again into the fog. My throat felt like it was closing. Panic ignited. I tugged Rex's leash and broke into a run, forcing my aching legs to power through the thick terrain. The undergrowth whipped against my shins as I stumbled over rocks and fallen branches. I had to find a route out. The swirling fog disoriented me, every direction identical in this forest of copycat trees. My mind was an echo chamber of fear. At some point, the trees parted, revealing a broad space, maybe a dried creek bed or a rocky clearing. I stood panting, scanning the perimeter. My heart nearly stopped at the sight. Near a large fallen pine lay an object that looked like a person's body, half hidden in a mound of leaves. I forced myself to approach, hoping it wasn't a corpse, but it was, or at least it used to be. The tattered clothing suggested it was a hiker. The limbs, though, were twisted backward, the bones snapped. The rib cage was splayed open, the flesh around it gnawed or stripped away, and the skull was bare as if peeled clean. It was the most horrific thing I'd ever seen. The stench made me retch, doubling over. Rex whimpered, backing away. My eyes watered. I wanted to run. Yet the sight also compelled me closer, as though I needed to confirm it wasn't Trent. The face was gone, so I couldn't be sure, but the hair color didn't match Trent's. Possibly some other poor soul, maybe from a previous hiking season. This wasn't a normal animal attack, though. The rending of the limbs looked cruel and deliberate, almost ritualistic. I stumbled away, gagging on bile. My vision swam. I had to get out. But how? Rex barked then. A sharp alarm bark that jolted me to attention. At the edge of the clearing stood a silhouette, something tall and crooked. I glimpsed bone-like limbs with bits of flesh draped upon them. The outline was vaguely canine in the torso, but with a twisted posture that allowed it to stand on two legs. Where its face should have been was a half-human shape, some of the features reminiscent of Trent's. This was the moment I realized with sickening clarity that thing had used Trent as a skin, like a costume. Trent was either dead or consumed. My mind repeated the name, though it had no official label, but it felt right to call it Korik, a name that flickered in my mind unbidden, perhaps from a half-remembered local legend. The Bone Dog. Whatever it was, it stared at me for a long moment, then vanished into the fog with impossible speed. I collapsed to my knees, hyperventilating. This was insanity. Monsters don't exist. People don't get replaced by illusions of themselves, not in the real world. But as much as I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't unsee that half-flayed hiker, or the glimpses of Trent's face on a creature that clearly wasn't human. Rex nuzzled me anxiously. He was shaking too, his flank wound clearly bothering him. Summoning what little courage I had, I pulled out my magnesium stove, flares, anything that could possibly fend off whatever this Korik was if it came back. A plan formed. Maybe fire would drive it away. I remembered reading about certain folklore creatures that hated bright flames. If there was any truth to that, maybe it would buy us time to escape. My mind raced with swirling images. Trent's wide grin, the greenish fire, the way time refused to behave. I needed to cling to something tangible. We continued pushing forward, though forward was arbitrary. I didn't know if we were heading back to the car or deeper into the wilderness. The entire forest had become a labyrinth. Periodically, I'd find my own footprints or recognized a slash from my knife on a trunk, indicating I'd passed that same spot before. Hours or minutes blurred together. Everything repeated. At one point, we broke into a smaller clearing with dead grass. Rex suddenly growled, ears flat, hackles raised. I turned in time to see the shape of Korik bounding toward us on all fours. It was unbelievably fast, covering the distance in seconds. I screamed, fumbling for my flare gun, but it slammed into me with the force of a runaway train. I crashed to the ground, losing my grip on the gun. My flashlight went spinning off into the undergrowth. Korik's breath hit my face with that putrid stench, rotten and earthy, its jaws parted in a mockery of a grin. I glimpsed the interior of its mouth, layered with rows of mismatched teeth, some human, some animal. A horrifying patchwork. It raised a clawed hand to strike. Rex lunged, biting into the creature's forearm. For a moment, the dog's fierce loyalty pushed it back. Korik roared, or rather made a sound that was half roar, half human shriek, as if multiple voices were trapped inside it. I used that distraction to crawl away, frantically searching for my flare gun. Rex held on, growling even as the creature shook him violently. I heard a sickening crack. Rex yelped and let go, flying a few feet away, whimpering in pain. My vision narrowed to a tunnel of rage and terror. I spotted the flare gun behind a rock, snatched it, and aimed it at Korik. Hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. The first shot fired wide, streaking red light into the forest. The second shot grazed the creature's torso, igniting a spatter of magnesium. For an instant, the clearing lit up bright as day, the creature's twisted silhouette flickering in the glare. It howled, backing up, flailing as the magnesium sparked across its patchwork hide, sizzling where flesh and bone fused. I rushed to Rex, who lay panting in agony. His front leg was bent oddly. I realized it was broken. My heart hammered with grief and fear. I scooped him into my arms as best I could, the adrenaline surging as I staggered away from the thrashing monster. The magnesium flame died, leaving only a few sparks. Korik sank to all fours, letting out a guttural hiss, but it didn't chase us immediately. Maybe it needed time to recover from the burn. I stumbled through the forest, carrying Rex, my eyes blurred with tears at the sound of his whines. I whispered apologies, trying to reassure him. Time was meaningless again. I don't know how long or how far I walked. Eventually, I realized I was no longer sure which direction was which. The gloom beneath the pines stretched on endlessly. When exhaustion forced me to stop, I found a cluster of massive boulders leaning together, creating a partial shelter. I crawled beneath them with Rex, wrapping us in my sleeping bag to retain what little warmth I could. My dog's breath was ragged, and his eyes darted anxiously. I took out my canteen, gave him water. He drank a little, but mostly whined in distress. I felt a hollow ache in my chest. He was badly hurt, and I had limited supplies and no immediate way out. In the dim flicker of my nearly dead flashlight, I checked Rex's broken leg. The bone hadn't pierced the skin, but the swelling was bad. I splinted it with a piece of tent pole and some bandages. He kept licking my hands as I worked, even though each movement made him shiver. The loyalty in his eyes broke my heart. I promised him we'd get out of here, all the while feeling the edges of my sanity fraying. At some point, I must have dozed off or fainted. When I opened my eyes, I saw that the sky overhead had a dull, pre-dawn glow, or it might have been late afternoon. The color was so gray, it was impossible to tell. My phone was still dead. My watch looked frozen at 5:07. I had no clue if it was day or night, but the forest around me was quiet, too quiet. I stood gingerly, muscles sore, hunger gnawing at me. I realized I hadn't eaten in who knows how long. I rummaged in my pack, found some energy bars. Rex refused to eat. He just laid there, ears twitching at every sound. I tried to gather myself, planning my next move. If I could get back to the main trail, maybe I'd see a ranger or another hiker. But the memory of that eviscerated body told me that might not even be safe. Also, the main trail might not be the same as it was. The forest kept shifting, leading me in circles. Something supernatural was at play. Trembling, I left the boulder shelter, Rex limping behind me on 3 legs. The air was stagnant, the entire place feeling stale. For a while we walked in near silence, my mind reeling with half-formed prayers, regrets, pleas for help. I'd never been religious, but fear can pry open your heart. Then, unbelievably, we stumbled upon a sign that looked official. A battered wooden sign reading, "Unknown Pond Trailhead, 2.5 miles. Relief flooded me. If we could follow that sign, maybe we'd reach the parking area. And I could drive to safety, find a vet for Rex, call the authorities. I guided him along the indicated direction. We moved as fast as we dared, Rex hobbling. Every few hundred yards, I'd check behind us, terrified that Korik might appear again. Though I never saw it directly, I felt we were being watched. The undergrowth rustled occasionally, or the wind would stir the canopy in an unnatural way. More than once, I swore I heard a voice calling my name with an echo. I pressed on, ignoring the creeping paranoia. Then we came to a bizarre turn in the trail, one that ended abruptly in a steep drop-off. This definitely wasn't part of the path I'd taken initially. I peered over the ledge, seeing nothing but swirling fog. I realized the sign might have been a trick, leading us nowhere. I cursed under my breath. My despair grew. Everything was conspiring to keep us trapped. My fists clenched, tears stinging the corners of my eyes as Rex whimpered. I turned away, and that was when I saw 2 shapes in the fog, both about dog-sized. My stomach lurched. Then I heard barking, Rex's bark, from behind me. But that made no sense because Rex was right beside me, trembling. The second bark came again, identical like an echo, from the shapes in the fog. A wave of horror crashed over me. There were now 2 dogs in my sight. The real Rex at my side, and another Rex about 20 yards away, half shrouded by the haze. Even through the gloom I recognized the same posture, the same coloring, except its eyes gleamed with a faint greenish reflection. It let out a guttural snarl that mimicked my dog's exactly. For a heartbeat I froze. Then the shape lunged forward, and the real Rex barked furiously. The imposter dog advanced. I drew my hunting knife, not sure what else to do. A savage fight seemed imminent. But then the shape behind the false Rex, bigger and more twisted, emerged. Korik. It advanced in its half-crouched posture, bone and rotten flesh sliding with each step. It was controlling the imposter. My mind reeled with terror. The real Rex tried to stand, ready to defend me, but he was injured and wobbly. My heart hammered, telling me to run. But run where? The ledge behind us was a dead end, and we'd never outrun that monstrosity, especially with Rex's broken leg. The imposter dog crept forward, bearing fangs that looked too large. I glanced at Rex, then made a snap decision. I grabbed a fist-sized rock from the ground and hurled it at the false dog, hoping to stun it. My throw was off, missed by inches. The creature snarled, lunging at me, jaws snapping. Rex, with a heroic final burst of loyalty, lunged at it in turn. They collided in a tangle of fur and teeth. Over the thrashing, I heard Korik let out a hideous chortling sound, as if it was amused by the spectacle. Fear and confusion swallowed me. In the melee, it was impossible to tell them apart. Two German shepherds, snarling, rolling in the dirt. One was wounded, the other was not. My instincts screamed that I needed to protect my dog. I saw an opening. One of them pinned the other down, going for the throat. I couldn't see which was which. Driven by panic, I grabbed a heavy branch and swung it with all my strength, aiming for the one on top. The blow landed with a sickening crack. Silence followed. The creature on top recoiled, howling. I glimpsed its muzzle shifting, eyes flickering bright green. Then it collapsed, body flickering like a glitch in reality, revealing patches of raw flesh, broken bone. A smell of sulfur. It convulsed and then sank away, almost dissolving into the ground like a rotting husk. Korik let out a terrible shriek, retreating into the fog. I saw it vanish behind the swirling white curtain. For a moment, I thought we'd won. Relief, shock, all of it blurred. Then I looked down at the other dog, the one pinned beneath the imposter. My stomach lurched in horror. It was Rex, my real Rex, and I'd struck the wrong one. He was lying with his skull caved in from my blow. Blood pooled beneath his head, eyes still open but lifeless. I collapsed to my knees, trembling uncontrollably, tears flooding my vision. I tried to cradle him, but the angle of his neck was wrong. I wailed in grief, the sound echoing emptily in the forest. My best friend, my only real companion, gone because of me. My mind nearly broke then. I could barely think or breathe. I rocked back and forth, cradling Rex's limp body, muttering apologies over and over. The fog thickened, or maybe I just lost sense of my surroundings entirely. For a while, I was sure I heard the chittering laugh of Korik from somewhere close by, mocking me. The forest itself felt malevolent, as though it delighted in my mistake. Finally, rage took hold. Something in me snapped. I felt a desperate will to survive, to make Korik pay for what it had done. I laid Rex gently on the ground, whispering goodbye through choked sobs. Then I grabbed the flares from my pack, along with the magnesium stove fuel. If I could find the monster again, maybe I could burn it, at least hurt it enough to escape. I forced myself upright, eyes burning with tears. I wandered, or rather stumbled, through the ghostly pines. Time had lost all meaning, but my mind was now fixated on one thing: luring that creature in and lighting it up. My entire body ached, grief and fury merging into a reckless drive. The forest seemed to shift around me, leading me in small circles until I found a place that seemed suitable for an ambush. A cluster of trees forming a rough ring around a clearing full of dead leaves. I carefully arranged the stove fuel in a wide arc, saturating the leaf litter so it would catch quickly. Then I knelt at the center, holding a single flare. I tore a page from my now ruined sketchbook, the only partial page I had left, a scribbled drawing of a fox from earlier that week, and waved it around, almost daring Korik to come. The forest answered with a rustle, a faint scraping sound. A moment later, it emerged. I saw it step into the clearing. Tall, bone-white limbs, scraps of what looked like Trent's clothing or flesh still clinging. Its face was an amalgam of skull and wood, jaw elongated, multiple teeth clacking. A smell of decay rolled off it. It regarded me with an odd tilt of its head, like it recognized me from some twisted sense of familiarity. I didn't hesitate. I struck the flare, the bright red flame crackling, and flung it onto the fuel-soaked leaves. Fire erupted in a sudden whoosh, encircling the clearing in a ring of flames. The monster screeched, stepping back, then realized it was surrounded. I grabbed another flare and advanced, my heart hammered with terror but also an animalistic fury. One chance, that was all I had. Korik lunged for me, so fast I almost didn't react in time. I spun, stumbling away from its claws, throwing the second flare at its chest. Magnesium flared up, burning white-hot. The stench of scorched flesh filled the air as it howled, thrashing. Chunks of charred flesh and bone flaked off, revealing blackened sinew beneath. The ring of fire closed around us, crackling with intense heat. Sparks flew, stinging my skin. I shielded my face with my arm, gagging on the smell of burning decay. The creature hissed, turning its hollow eyes on me. It took a half-step forward, as if about to attack again, but the flames leapt higher, pinning it in place. Its chest collapsed inward with a sickening pop, greenish fluid oozing out. It screeched, half human, half beast. In that moment, I wondered if I was looking at the souls of all the hikers it had consumed, swirling around in that fluid mass. My terror soared, but I held my ground, refusing to let it step past me into the ring's edge. I shook a can of stove fuel, hurling another splash of it at the creature. The flames intensified and Korik convulsed, jaws opening in a voiceless cry. Then it crumpled, dropping to its knees. The skeleton-like frame melted into a puddle of black and green sludge. Gasping, eyes watering, I staggered backward from the inferno. The swirling flames devoured everything, climbing up tree trunks. I realized too late that the forest might catch completely. Panicked, I slipped through a gap in the ring of fire, singeing my clothes. I stumbled away, tripping over roots until I collapsed in the undergrowth. My ears rang with the roar of flames. Smoke billowed, stinging my throat. I lay there, coughing, heart pounding, for a length of time that felt immeasurable. Eventually, the fire's roar seemed to fade, or maybe I was passing in and out of consciousness. Part of me expected Korik to lurch out, half burned, ready to tear me apart. But it never came. The only sound was the crackling of embers somewhere behind me. When I managed to stand, I found that the ring of fire had burned itself out, leaving smoldering ash. The forest beyond was charred in patches, but it looked like the flames hadn't spread too far. The thick fog or the dampness of the undergrowth must have contained it. I approached the clearing carefully, stepping over blackened debris. Where Korik had collapsed was a misshapen pile of bone fragments and chunks of something like charred bark, all fused together. No sign of movement, no sign of life. The adrenaline drained, replaced by a hollow emptiness. I'd burned it, apparently, but at what cost? Rex was gone. I had no sense of where I was or what time it might be. I dropped to my knees, letting out a ragged sob that tore through me like a knife. I don't know how long I knelt there, soaked in grief. But eventually, the survival instinct kicked in again. I realized if there was any chance of making it out alive, I had to move. Somehow, I managed to piece myself together, grabbing the last scraps of my gear. I limped through the smoldering area, searching for a sign of the trail. Each step ached. My lungs burned with smoke inhalation, but the crippling heartbreak was the worst pain of all. I might have walked for hours. The forest, though, was oddly silent, no longer twisting around me the way it had before. Perhaps Korik's hold on it had weakened, or maybe I was just delirious. At last, I spotted a shape through the thinning fog. A wooden structure. Approaching carefully, I realized it was a small ranger station, shut for the season but not boarded up. Relief and disbelief warred in my mind. Could this be real, or another cruel illusion? I hurried to the door, found it locked. I peered through the window. The inside looked dusty, deserted, but real. I smashed a side window with a rock. I was beyond caring about property damage. I climbed in and found a musty old radio, a phone line, but both were dead. The place smelled like old books and pine-scented cleaner. I rummaged around, discovered some outdated maps. None quite matched the immediate area. The calendar on the wall read March 1997, which made no sense whatsoever. I rubbed my eyes, cursing the illusions that refused to let me go. At that point, exhaustion overtook me, and I just collapsed in a corner, trying to stay awake but failing. I dreamt of Rex's last look, the heartbreak in his eyes, the meltdown of that creature's flesh. I dreamt of Trent's grin and the sound of snapping bones. When I opened my eyes again, sunlight poured through the busted window, and I heard faint birdsong outside, real birdsong. For a moment, that felt hopeful. I got up stiffly, noticing how my clothes were torn, my arms covered in scratches. My reflection in the dusty glass of the station's door stopped me cold. My eyes looked sunken, my cheeks hollow. But there was more. The corners of my mouth seemed turned upward, not in an intentional smile, but as though the muscles were resting that way. When I tried to relax them, it took effort. A small shudder crept up my spine. Was something inside me now? Stepping outside, I found a dirt lot. No vehicle except for the rotting frame of an old truck. The forest looked normal, if a bit gray with the morning mist. I started walking along a narrow lane that led away from the station. Eventually, it opened up into a real paved road. I recognized a sign. Route 110. That's how I made it out. I flagged down a driver who stared at me like I was a ghost. He asked if I'd been in an accident. I said I got lost hiking. He gave me a ride to a small clinic in Berlin, New Hampshire, where I told them I'd been separated from my group and lost for days. I couldn't bring myself to mention Korik or the monstrous illusions. They'd never believe me. The doctor who treated my dehydration and smoke inhalation wanted to know about my dog. I just said he ran off, my eyes brimming with tears. The staff quietly avoided further questions. When I finally reached the parking lot where I'd left my car, it was there, covered in fallen leaves and pine needles like it had been abandoned for months. I don't remember how I got behind the wheel. My body moved in a numb haze. My phone was still dead. The date on the car's clock was a random glitch, blinking zeros. I drove home to Massachusetts, ignoring how my reflection in the rearview mirror occasionally caught me with that odd, too long smile. That was a few days ago, or weeks, I'm not sure. My sense of time hasn't been right since. At night, I still hear Rex whining, see him lying there with his head cracked open because of my stupid, fatal error. The very thought sends me spiraling into guilt and despair. Part of me wonders if Korik is truly gone or just waiting. Sometimes I catch a reflection in the window, my face flickering, as though there's something behind my skin. I don't know if it's an after effect of the forest or if a piece of that creature latched onto my soul. Even now, I refuse to talk to anyone about the details. If they ask, I say it was a brutal hiking accident, that my dog died saving me from a wild animal. But nightmares don't come from simple accidents, not ones like this, and my nightmares are all too real. I keep seeing that fire burning around me, the ring of bright flames reflecting in the creature's many teeth. I hear the mocking echo of laughter and the rustle of the wind. Whenever I see a stray dog on the street, I find myself searching its eyes for a glimmer of greenish reflection, wondering if this is the day Korik resurfaces. I can't escape the knowledge that I left a part of me behind in those woods. Or perhaps I brought something back. Every mirror is suspect. Every day I double-check my expressions. Sometimes I don't blink for too long. Or I find my lips curling into a grin for no reason at all. I can't tell if I'm just traumatized or truly possessed. Neither possibility offers much comfort. So, that's it. That's my story, or the closest I can get to telling it truthfully. My name is Caleb Monroe, 32 years old. In late October of 2024, I hiked Mount Kitt in the White Mountains of New Hampshire with my dog, Rex. We never came back the same. In fact, Rex never came back at all. And as for me, I'm not certain which part of me returned. If you're reading this, I beg you, don't go looking for that trail. Don't seek out the forest near Unknown Pond in the off-season, because you might find what I found. Or worse, it might find you. And if it does, it won't let go, not even when you think you've escaped. I still dream of bone and bark, and in every dream I hear a voice whispering my name from behind a wide grin. I suspect that voice will follow me the rest of my life, however long that is. Sometimes I look in the mirror and see that grin reflecting back at me, and that's when I know I'm still lost in the forest. Perhaps I always will be. Oh, one.